Thank you, everyone. We'll start with the declaring the meeting open, and then we will say the Karakia together, and then I'll go through the order of service. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, ehi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti he mauri ora. Thank you all, councillors. If you want to take a seat. Now, I'm going to invite the members of the Interfaith Council who are here with us, lovely to have you here, to come up to the public participation end of the table. Just the two of you, Manjeet and David. Welcome. It's lovely to have you here. So, councillors, this is something which I mentioned to you I think last week. I met with the Interfaith Council about a month or so ago, and the Interfaith Council covers most of the religious groups in Wellington and is seeking to cover all of them. And this is really an opportunity for us to try and be inclusive and to showcase the diversity that we have in our community. And it's something that I think really follows also from the Christchurch mosque attacks, where we said we are one in our diversity. And one of the things that and I know Manjeet was part of organising was opportunities for people to learn more about the different faiths. So what I thought we would do, and the Interfaith Council is keen to do this, is to participate at the beginning of our council meetings with appropriate prayers from and it will be circulated among the different faith groups with the Interfaith Council. So Manjeet, David, very welcome. If you want to introduce yourself and then take us through what you want to say.
I'd appreciate it if you would stand for the prayer. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, sheherianu, vekeimanu, vehigimanu, lazan hazeh. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
The Hebrew prayer called Shehecheyanu, which I've just said, translates to, "Blessed are you, maker of the universe, who has granted us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this occasion." And the special occasion today is, as the Mayor has said, the opening of your monthly council meeting with an interfaith prayer. Not all New Zealanders adhere to a faith or follow an organised religion, but about half of our population does, and a large number of those come from ethnic minorities. So by agreeing to open your monthly proceedings with an interfaith prayer, the Wellington City Council is actually sending a message that it values diversity and inclusion and does aim for social cohesion, as Mayor Foster has just said. And we think this message is especially important just now as we digest the report of the Royal Commission into the Christchurch mosque massacre. Your decision will be welcomed by the minority and interfaith communities around Aotearoa, New Zealand. Just now, the Jewish community is celebrating Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights, which has affinities with similar observances in nearly all of the world's traditions and cultures, like the Star of Bethlehem in Christianity, Diwali in Hinduism and Sikhism, and Kwanzaa has the Kinara. So the symbolism of light overcoming darkness, of light representing goodness, is actually universal. And may such light help this council in its deliberations and decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you. David and Manjeet, thank you very, very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing more of you in the new year.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I've already welcomed everyone to today's council meeting. As you know, it is being live streamed. If you are going to be leaving the meeting at any stage, please let me know or Democratic Services know. We will consider the items in their normal order. And so what we're going to do is I'll deal with the apologies, announcements by the Mayor, conflict of interest declarations, confirmation of minutes and public participation. Then we'll adjourn the council meeting and go to the strategy and policy meeting for the annual report, and then we'll come back to council meeting after that. Right, so are there any apologies? I know we've got Councillor Foon on Zoom. Nice to have you there.
Apologies for early departure. We're still going at 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies from Councillor O'Neill.
Okay. That's for the whole meeting?
No, just for lateness.
Right, okay, right, thank you. Right. Anybody else? No, okay. Right, I'll move that we accept those. Seconded by Councillor Fitzsimons. If you vote, please. Well done, thank you. Now, next item is Mural Announcements, and I did actually want to make a Mural announcement at this stage because it is the end of the year, and I thought it was worth reflecting just briefly on the year and on what we've got coming up in front of us. It'd be fair to say 2020 has been a tough year. I've sort of put it as a PPP, as pipes, politics and pandemics. It's a year we've learnt to Zoom, to watch concerts online and to commemorate Anzac Day together apart. But I would like us to spare a thought for all of those people in other countries who can't even do this. You know? And you look at the statistics around the world, and they are getting worse, not better. The green shoots are there of vaccines and of looking at bubbles, but at the moment it's pretty dire looking in so many parts of the world. I want to thank you all for your hard work during the year. So Barbara, you and your team who've done a fantastic job, and we really appreciate all the work, not just during the pandemic, with the lockdown period and the pivoting that the organisation had to do, but throughout to provide us with good advice and the hard work that it's done. And it's not just the hard work we see in these buildings, but it's the hard work we see, whether it's in the roads or the parks or the housing. It's across the organisation that touches all of our community. And councillors, I want to thank you too for your hard work during the year. I was reflecting back, we've got some pretty significant things done. Well, first of all, of course, we had the Pandemic Response and Recovery Plan. We supported our business community, and we also supported our people, particularly those who are the most vulnerable in our community, and we got everybody off the streets and into good housing, and I think that was really, really important, working together with organisations like DCM and the City Mission. We've had a very strong events program, and I want to pay tribute to your team and also a team at Wellington NZ, supporting our business, arts and culture sectors. And it's actually been really good to start getting a lot of positive feedback, particularly from the arts and culture sector, on the work that we've been doing then. And then there's the activation program, which we've got on at the moment, and I know many of you have noticed that, and that's gone down very, very well as well. We've delivered safer speeds in the central city. We've delivered a citywide parking policy. Councillor Condi, well done on the work there. We have made decisions on Omaroro and got the project underway after about 20 years. We have sorted e-scooter arrangements, I think. We have re-established the Nighttime Economic Forum to help us with issues particularly around Courtney Place. We have agreed a Te Atakura implementation plan. We've opened Te Awe Interim Library. We've consulted on, I think we did a really good consultation and decision on the best option for our central library, and the detailed planning I think is now underway. We've made a decision on the municipal office building. We've settled, and well done Sarah on this one, we've settled the Civic Administration building insurance claim after 4 years. We've agreed a new solid waste bylaw. Councillor Foom, well done. We have disposed of some standalone housing to allow reinvestment in our social housing portfolio, and we now have the first of the affordable accommodation available for rentals and looking for people to rent those in the downtown area in Tikanga. We're consulting on a new cemeteries management plan, Councillor Fitzsimons. We have almost completed cycleways and the sea wall work around Cobham Drive and Evans Bay, Deputy Mayor. We've engaged on a new spatial plan, and there's been a lot of work there, Councillor Pannett in particular, but all of you have been involved in that. We have agreed to be part of the Wellington Regional Growth Framework, and we've repaired pipes in Willis Street, the tricky Mount Albert pipes, and the Mile Point Interceptor, and thank you, Councillor Rush, for the work that you've done there. We've engaged on with our community on a new economic strategy, so Councillor Calvert, the work that you've done all the way through the year there as well. And we've also engaged with the government on Three Waters reforms and Mayoral Taskforce on Three Waters, which we'll receive today. So, those are some of the things that we've done this year. There's a lot that we've got through. Councillor O'Neill, welcome. 2021 holds a lot of opportunities and challenges. They are all linked together, but I'm going to pick a few of the biggest ticket items that I think we face going into the first quarter of next year. First one of them, obviously, is the long-term plan. That's going to be exceptionally challenging for all of us, as it will be for most councils, and we are going to need to make some significant and hard trade-offs. We're going to focus on infrastructure, on upgrading our Three Waters network and advancing investment in the landfill and in sludge treatment. We'll invest in reducing our city emissions and ongoing environmental restoration, so that's important. Councillor Paul there in Te Atakura. And Councillor O'Neill in the natural environment area as well. We will hopefully Let's Get Wellington moving in the new year. Spatial planning is going to involve ongoing community engagement, growing understanding of infrastructure needs and costs, and will lead us into a new district plan, and I'm looking forward to the work that is going to be done there. And we'll continue work, including with government, to make our social housing portfolio more sustainable, and that's work that Councillor Fitzsimons and I are doing with the government. We'll deliver 3 new important pieces of strategy for our economy, arts and culture, and also in the social wellbeing area. And we'll continue the delivery of Tākina, the Town Hall, complete delivery of the St James Theatre, and construction on the library will get underway, and we'll engage with our community and make decisions on Tanako Civic Square. And we'll also continue to enhance the way we engage with our communities, and I think the conversations we're going to have today about the advisory groups, Councillor Matthews with iwi to Councillor Day, are important parts of that. So look, I just want to say again, thank you everyone for your hard work during this year, and to wish you all a safe, happy and restful break so we can come back firing on all cylinders in 2021. Kia ora. Conflict of interest declarations, are there any? I see none. Confirmation of the minutes, that's the minutes of the 25th of November. I will move that. Deputy Mayor, do you wish to second? Thank you. We'll put that. All those in favour, please press the green button. And Councillor Foon, thank you. Press the green button when it works. Right, there are no items. Councillor Calvert. Thank you. There are no items not on the agenda. Public participation. Right, first up I've got David Gordon representing KiwiRail. We've got you down for 10 minutes. Is the clock working, Donna? So David, welcome. Good to see you here. And you've got 10 minutes. If you want to leave some time for questions, we always appreciate that. The clock will count down so you can see how much time you've got.
Where do I? Oh, I see.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. I'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. To my right, I have also Walter Rushbrook, who's the General Manager of the Inter-Island Line. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk today. So start with a basic statement. We're not here to change your minds about location. You've taken a stance. Kaifarafa is your preferred option for the new ferry terminal, and that's your decision to take. We're here to confirm our focus is now on developing that new ferry terminal at Kaifarafa. We want to move at pace, and we'd like you to be clear now on some of the implications of Kaifarafa, so when challenges arise, which they will, then Wellington stays supportive. Staying at Kaifarafa is not the same as status quo. We can't delay the project any longer. Our ferries are old and they need replacement. And on the other side of the strait, the wharves at Picton are life expired. We want to provide 2 tailor-made, efficiently configured, rail-enabled, very important, and more environmentally friendly ferries and new terminal infrastructure. It's a big multi-generational investment. It's happening on our watch and it's happening on yours. We see the Inter-Islander as an extension of State Highway 1 and the main trunk line. We've got 3 customers, the railway, the trucks and the tourists, which is private vehicles and walk-ons. We're also a civil defence lifeline in emergency. That's something we've taken very seriously in our consideration of what type of ferries to get and the location. We want to be able to help out after an emergency. This is a $1 billion project plus for the ports, Crown and KiwiRail. It'll create design, construction and support jobs, it'll support the port, and as noted previously, it's a lifeline. For us, it's also part of our push towards environmental goals. The government declared a climate emergency, a carbon neutral economy by 2050. Our target is by 2030 to reduce our emissions by 30% and be carbon neutral by 2050. The new ferries will reduce the Inter-Island's carbon emission by 40% from day one. And on average, every tonne of freight moved by rail produces 66% less carbon emissions compared with heavy road freight. The ferries and the rail connections are part of the overall climate solution. Walter could talk for hours about the ships alone, but we've only got 2 minutes, so let's be pretty clear. They are bespoke ferries. They're designed for this route. They're bigger, but they're designed to maximise the capacity better than modifying a second-hand ferry. They are carbon efficient, and they are much more manoeuvrable than the current fleet. They are designed to be a lifeline in emergencies and a rescue vehicle, and we want them to be a must-do and iconic tourism experience. We spent a long time around the location, and with $1 billion investment, so you should. At the start of this project, we reviewed all options, we being KiwiRail. We looked at Napier, Whanganui, Wellington, and the North Island, Picton or Christchurch. You start broad and you narrow your options. The fact is the only sensible option is Wellington to Picton. Then the Future Port Forum considered all locations around Wellington Harbour and concluded that Kings Wharf and Kaiwharawhara were the only two sensible options there, and had an initial final recommendation, say, Kings Wharf. At that time, that recommendation was agreed. It was said we would revisit the decision in the event of additional seismic information, which we went out and got in early 2020. There's no ideal location for a ferry terminal in Wellington. I think we all know that. But I want you to be clear on the seismic issue, because not all quakes are equal, and not all sites are equal with different quakes. So I've got 4 scenarios here, and the terrible thing about quakes is you can't estimate when they're going to arrive, but the good thing, if you can call it a good thing, is that we've got quite a few good field experiments in Kaikoura and Christchurch recently to know how quakes actually behave. So if we have this Hikurangi subduction, which is basically New Zealand deciding to part company with itself, then it doesn't really matter where the ferry terminal is. It's going to be severely damaged. If we have a little minor quake somewhere and a bit of shaking in Wellington, similarly it doesn't really matter where it is. So I'm going to talk about a couple of other quakes that are real. So what happens if the Wellington fault ruptures, which is Kaikoura event happening in Wellington? As if the Kaikoura quake happened there, we would get total destruction of the facilities at Kaiwharawhara. Don't think of the fault line as being a straight line. What we know now from Kaikoura is that it is a band and it twists and bends. We'll be able to keep people safe, but we won't be able to come back and operate. If we have a Christchurch-style quake, then both sites will be damaged. Both should be recoverable at about the same time. And if we have a distant quake, then both sites are about the same. So our concern has always been on the Wellington fault. If that ruptures, in other words, if we have a Kaikoura in Wellington, what can we do about it? As I said, if we stay at Kaiwharawhara, it's not status quo. It requires a major redevelopment. It will throw up challenges that ourselves, the port, GWRC and WCC will have to work together to overcome. We cannot subsequently reverse decision again. Commitment to Kaiwharawhara has to be whole. There's environmental issues, there's consenting issues, there's engineering and roading challenges. So what we're here to do is to make sure that in backing Kaiwharawhara, which is where we're focusing our effort, we're backing it for the long term, not just and not walking away when the going gets tough. We'd like to come back in the new year and brief you more fully on that. Finally, I'll just add, should we delay? To us, New Zealand's history is littered with decisions on major infrastructure developments, all of which become more expensive over time, and with the consequences of failure being more severe. The ferries at their end of their life, New Zealand has a right to expect low-emission, carbon-efficient ferries. A wharf can be built and a terminal at Kaiwharawhara and gradually expanded to accommodate Bluebridge if they came down there. So to make these decisions isn't easy, but they need to be made, and then we all stay the course. Thank you, Your Worship.
David, thank you very much. Nothing else to add? No, okay. I've got questions, Councillor Pannett, and then I've got a question too. Okay, Councillor Sparrow.
Thank you very much for coming in. That was really helpful and for being responsive to public concerns. Can I just ask you what modelling you've done around sea level rise?
There's been concept design prepared and a general arrangement. So the designs in Wellington are not as far as advanced as Picton, but down in Picton we've done estimates of the amount of sea level rise and raised the levels to either accommodate it at the time of construction or future-proof for allowing for that in the distant future.
Thank you. Councillor Sparrow.
Thank you for that. You said that if the Wellington fault ruptures, a terminal at Kaiwharawhara would be badly damaged or worse, a whole lot worse. Would the other one be sufficiently far away to... Is the impact going to be much the same at the other one, or is it going to be much different?
Yep. So at Kaiwharawhara, the new information we had was that the fault rupture zone goes from Tenakori Hill approximately out to the end of the wharves as they're built at the moment. So quite a wide zone. It's not just a single fault rupture line. So that is unique to Kaiwharawhara. There's no rupture zone at the King's Wharf location. Both sites will get general shaking, but Kaiwharawhara has the extra seismic rupture component which we're concerned about.
Thanks. Councillor Young.
Thank you, and thank you very much for hearing our concerns and being so proactive. Could you just tell me why you decided to go for rail-enabled ferries, bearing in mind they are far less flexible than the roll-on, roll-off ferries in the event of an earthquake because the rail lines are fixed?
Firstly, they are rail-enabled because we're a railway, and the objective is to ensure that freight on the rail can come through, go straight onto the ferry and across the line. The ferries are designed also to operate in roll-on, roll-off mode in the event of an emergency. So if the rail is out, the ferry can still go and operate, provided it has somewhere to go to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, thanks for coming in, and I'm taking on board the first comment you made, which is that you're not here to change our mind. I guess I just want to know what is the key takeaway you want us to take from this, because you've raised issues about earthquakes and the implications of those. What as a councillor, what are you hoping to leave in my mind as your kind of key point?
Move promptly, make this happen, and be prepared when the things get difficult at Kaiwharawhara, for some of the pushback that will come there.
Just one question from me. I know time's just expired, but just government funding. I know they've put money in the shovel in the shovel readies for Picton, but
no, the government hasn't put any funding in shovel ready for Picton. Picton is a named project under the COVID Resource Management.
Oh, that's what it was. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So funding from government.
We're talking to government about that.
Good, thank you. David, thank you very much, both of you, for coming in.
Thank you, Worship.
Yep. Then I'd like to ask Darren Ponter to come up and speak on the same subject. Welcome, Darren. Always good to have you here.
Morning, councillors. So I've come to speak on the same item, strangely enough. Look, first let me just start by congratulating Councillors Young and Day and all of you for bringing forward this motion. It sort of mirrors a paper that we took to the Regional Council on the 9th of April earlier this year, though you've picked out a number of themes that are much more particular to the inner harbour, to Wellingtonians' enjoyment of that harbour, and what a ferry terminal would mean if it was located at King's Wharf in terms of noise, light intrusion, recreational amenity, etc. Let me also, now that we've had KiwiRail present, also acknowledge a significant turnaround, if you like, and a confirmation that KiwiRail are now focused on Kaiwharawhara. That will now focus us all, as David has said we need to do, on how we can actually get the ferry terminal at Kaiwharawhara built as soon as possible. David's not wrong. It's not a small undertaking, and it is quite a different proposition from what is there at the moment, which is a facility from the 1960s. Effectively, this is a huge change in facility and accommodating the large vessels. What we will be doing as a regional council, more than likely, and what we will be asking for your support on, is to go to the government and request either enabling legislation and or fast-tracking provisions under the RMA. Similar to the cycleway around the coast, which is already included in the legislation, we would be looking for this facility to receive the same form of treatment. Not as any exercise to skirt around the community and the environmental issues that this issue will land on our plates, but an acknowledgement that KiwiRail is likely soon to press the green button on purchasing the 2 new ferries. And if we actually want to get these terminals in place, we probably should have started the work 2 years ago. So we're under the gun, all of us, and we're going to need all the help we can to get it across the line. Finally, the seismic issues are a vexed issue. We are the first to acknowledge that Kaiwharawhara is the least preferred of all the sites that came out in the multivariate analysis in relation to resilience. But we can, as we know, as you well know, in terms of the issues that you've had to face in terms of building an infrastructure, we can plan for these things and we can build for them. In the event of a catastrophic earthquake, we won't just be talking about an outage of the ferry terminal, we'll be talking about the outage of the lower North Island, and we won't be moving any rail freight anywhere. So, there are a bigger set of issues than just the ferry terminal. But the issues that have been raised this morning are very real and will be in our mind as we work through with KiwiRail the build of the new ferry terminal. Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, Darren. I had a question from Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. Obviously, there's whatever's developed, it's big money. And so have you had any conversations with government in terms of what is likely to come from them to support it?
That's a conversation that KiwiRail would need to have at their end with the government. Effectively, the way it works in its most simplest form is that Centreport will build the facility and effectively lease it to KiwiRail. So immediately it's Centreport that needs to have the bulk of the funding, though KiwiRail will be looking for money as well.
But you also talked about, a cycleway and some other amenities attached to that. Is that something that would...
No, sorry, I was referring to the cycleway in relation to the fact that it is in the fast-tracking provisions already.
I see.
I doubt whether there will be any provision for cycleway in this facility. It's an industrial site.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Anyone else, councillors? So I guess, Darren, question from me. We heard from David to say that the desire now is to move at pace, and I'm hearing you're saying the same thing. I think we all agree with that.
Yep.
So we look forward to some conversations, I guess, in January.
Yes, very soon.
Excellent.
Kia ora.
Good. Thank you. Kia ora. And Darren, if I can wish you and all the rest of the team at Greater Wellington a very happy and safe Christmas.
Thank you very much, and in the new year we'll have you down to our new premises at the
we'll
Bucket
look forward
Fountain.
to it. It'll look pretty flash. Look very nice. Okay. Jess Wong from the Wellington Chinese Association speaking on the review of the advisory groups. Jess, welcome.
Hi.
We've got you down again for 10 minutes as speaking on behalf of an organisation.
Thank you. Kia ora, I'm Jessica. I'm a third-generation Kiwi-born Chinese. I have close ties to the community, having been a committee member of the Wellington Chinese Association and also as a member of their child organisation, which is Future Dragons, a young professional networking group for Chinese New Zealanders. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the Wellington Chinese Association, which is a capital branch of Aotearoa's and New Zealand's oldest national Chinese community organisation. Luke Chen, our president, unfortunately is unable to make it today, but sends his apologies. So I'm here to speak in support of an establishment in principle for an ethnic advisory panel. It's hard to ignore that Wellington, let alone in New Zealand, is an incredibly diverse place. To put that in perspective, almost 20% of Wellington is Asian. The Asian population has grown 28% since 2006. This comprises of multi-generational, incredibly diverse cultural groups and will only grow in the future. Following the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the terrorist attack on Christchurch on 15th March 2019, it is clear that not enough is being done to serve our ethnic communities. Following this, we believe that an ethnic advisory panel would raise the profile of minority communities in Wellington. Members of these ethnic communities have significant economic and cultural impact. For example, Victoria University of Wellington, Te Waka, has 3,600 international students from 116 countries. That makes up 16% of all students at Victoria. We are the capital city, and yet I believe that we fall behind other city councils such as Auckland and Christchurch. It is important to recognise our formal relationship and commitment to ethnic communities with businesses, the international community and central government. This reflects well on our city brand, known as a young, vibrant, inclusive, albeit windy community. Chinese and other minority communities have contributed in small ways since the early 1900s, if not before that. The Wellington Chinese Association is 85 years old, and the Chinese, along with other ethnic minority communities, have existed much longer than that. So throughout Wellington, communities have made both small and very significant contributions to the vibrancy of Wellington. There are so many initiatives that we can name. I think Manjit's Ector is a prime example. Future Dragons is one for the young. Currently, a lot of these initiatives are all community-driven and often fly under the radar. It is not adequately reflected in its governance structures, nor is it supported or embraced in ways it should be. Having an ethnic advisory panel will be a way for the Wellington City Council to recognise these contributions within structured decision-making processes. Structured input would ensure authentic, well-represented decision-making. As a young person, it is disappointing to see that our decision-makers are not taking an inclusive approach to future planning, and I fear that we may lose our unique cultural identities if we're not represented and supported in local government. What is really recognised is that there's significant nuance within ethnic communities or minority communities. If we look at our Chinese community, we speak over 300 languages. We uphold a large diversity of traditions, and many community organisations work tirelessly to keep this alive in Wellington. More often than not, the way in which local government thinks about ethnic communities is superficial and lacks understanding of this nuance. And with so many organisations, I believe that's a clear demonstration of how much nuance and the intricate changes between even one like ethnicity. I believe it is both the role of the community and local government to take ownership to protect these cultures and traditions. I believe for fair representation in local government, all voices should be heard. An ethnic advisory panel raises the profile of these ethnic communities, their values, and the skills and abundant knowledge they bring. This could be actionable and demonstrable leadership that the council could take to prove active effort to involve their local ethnic communities. This will lead to a vibrant, inclusive community that our future decision makers in Rangatahi want to live in. I believe this is the perfect opportunity to bring Wellington City Council and its councillors to be closer to the community. And it gives a chance to have grassroots engagement with ethnic communities, because I believe there's something that everyone can learn from these communities. It further gives the opportunity for our community organisations, such as the Chinese Association, and ethnic communities to have a stronger relationship with councillors. So my question to you is, how are you going to address the relationship with ethnic communities in order to make every Wellingtonian feel welcome?
Thank you, Jess. We've got time for some questions, and I had a first question from Councillor Paul. No, you don't have to for questions. Yeah, nobody. Well, one or two have, but some haven't. That's
sweet.
fine.
Kia ora, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciated hearing your whakaaro. I was just wondering, So our advisory groups, the numbers are quite small. I think they're about 12 each. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions about how we'd be able to make sure that was as inclusive as possible of all different cultures. And if not that, would you support like a forum so that more cultures and ethnicities could be included in that corridor?
Thank you. So I think the best great example of that is how the DIA approach their ethnic communities. So they have they've created a forum where they find expressions of interest who want to be on that committee, but they also those are community leaders and actively engage with the community organisations, and they all work quite closely together to be able to involve everyone into it.
Thanks. Anybody else? Councillor Condi.
Thank you, Jessica. I think, the vote that we had at Council on this already is that we absolutely support an ethnic, better connection with our ethnic communities in terms of that connection, and we're just not sure what the appropriate forum is for that to go forward. One of the issues that we have is we've just reviewed our advisory boards and how the advisory groups work, and we found that actually elections is not a great way to select candidates, and we've now moved to a process where all of the advisory groups will be selected rather than elected. So that brings back this sort of same concern about how would we go about choosing when there might be fewer than 20 representatives on a group like that, compared to, as you say, the significant nuances that there are in the ethnic communities. Do you have some views about that?
I have no particular views. I think the person to best talk to is Manjeet. I think he's is a good idea, but I think it's a good idea to follow the examples that other city councils have put towards how they have involved their ethnic communities.
Cool. Thank you. Jess, thank you very much. We really appreciate that.
Kia ora.
And you're very welcome to stay for the debate, but it might be quite a while, so you're also welcome to leave.
Thank you.
Okay. On the same subject, Felicity Wong. Felicity, welcome. You're here as an individual on this one, so you've got 5 minutes. And again, we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Hi, thank you for hearing me. Felicity Wong from Historic Places Wellington. Look, I'm also on the Oriental Bay Residents Association, and I can't help but welcome this announcement by KiwiRail. That's an aside. Look, the reason I'm here is to talk about the advisory groups and the report of strategy and policy. I've had a little bit of experience attending in the past the Accessibility Advisory Committee. You know that I'm vision impaired. I can't see you, and I'm having trouble reading my notes. Anyway, that committee works extremely well, and I know from meeting with Nick Ruane yesterday how much they appreciate the improvement in their activities. But I've come here today to talk about tolerance and discuss the need to really work on resolving differences. I did attend the Environmental Reference Group, for example, on Monday night, and have some concerns which I want to talk to you about. I want to ask the Council to review the membership of the Environmental Reference Group, and given its reach into urban planning, which does cover heritage, but there is no heritage sort of folk among those 11 current members. So, for example, on Monday night, when they were talking about their 5 greatest priorities in the long-term plan, one member talked about heritage in a very disparaging way, saying that heritage is blocking affordable housing and it should be bold. There's a specific problem about the way I think the council supports individuals in this particular group, and I wonder if there's some bias. I heard from these folk about they talked about structural repression, and that's quite an important point. They also talk, which I'd like to come back to, but they talked about putting significant resources into creating a flightless, i.e. closing down the airport within 3 years. Now, I know that's a problematic thing and it's not my issue, but I couldn't help but think it was a little sort of, batty. Recently, I've sat through 202 oral submissions over 5 days about the Wellington Spatial Plan. And Wellingtonians were compassionate about housing problems in Wellington. There were few that were in favour of sprawl. They were all concerned about climate. But the overwhelming majority had concerns about and did not support the current DSP version, the draft spatial plan. Now, the draft spatial plan became a contest in our community, between young people, between homeowners, between residents, between Generation Zero activists and so on. And I think that we need to focus on, really resolving the issues around housing, really resolving real issues around climate. But I'm not so sure that the activities, particularly on social media, of members of the advisory group are all that helpful. Now, there's a number of groups who hold themselves out to represent the council, and they tweet very disparagingly about submitters, for example, and they use, I believe, information that they gain through being on advisory groups and having a close connection to council officers about what's coming up, and I would include the draft spatial plan in that. People like Talk Wellington, Positively Welling, A City for People. There's a site called Spatial Plan, which was set up very early on to advocate in favour of the DSP. So I'm not sure there's much that you can do about that, but I do think that making fun of Wellingtonians who make submissions on the draft spatial plan is not fair. And I'll just read story number 21 from Spatial Plan. Mary from Berhampore, when I turned 65, I got my gold card and automatic membership of Heritage New Zealand. I'm now helping to ensure nobody touches the Miramar Wharf. I think in Wellington we have a real culture of preserving what's unique.
Felicity, can I get you just to wind up, please?
So I think that it's tolerance that we need, and I very much support the proposal for an ethnic advisory group as well. And I think there's an important point. You do need to try and reach hard-to-reach communities, but I think what's happening is a very divisive, intolerant approach to Wellington, and that's not what we need now. Thank you.
Felicity, thank you. And again, can I just say Happy Christmas to you as well?
And to all of you and all your hard work and all the hours that you've had to put in too. It deserves acknowledgement and respect as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. And then Warwick. Warwick, welcome. Are we changing topic here? You're going to come and talk to us about the report of the Mayoral Taskforce on Three Waters and representing the Wellington Residents Coalition. So welcome, Warwick.
Morning, Your Worship and councillors. I did email that Ariana would also be participating.
Absolutely fine.
So,
Ata Marie.
Ariana.
Kia ora, Ariana.
Ata Marie elected representatives by and for the people. Kia ora. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Ariana Paritūtanganui Tamati, and I'm going to do a general opening statement. We're specifically, and this is Warwick Taylor, specifically speaking to the report of the Mural Taskforce, Three Waters, and in particular the case to accelerate the business case for water metering in private residential homes. So that's what we're speaking to today. My general statement is based around the issue of water. It is in fact the most, we could argue, fundamental and vital commodity that this council manages, and it's essential to life. Our concern with the investigation of water metering is the potential for it to, once separated out, and put into whatever structure, it to be used as a commodity and to be privatised in the future. And we want to ensure that future generations are safeguarded from that eventuality. If we can look at a broader terms in the way our society is running towards inequality in water, we don't want to place future generations with the burden of the eventuality of having to be burdened and worry about water and the payment of water and the use of water. We think it should be free and it should be managed by publicly elected representatives. I want to just use a case in regard to waste management and what happened in the history of waste management in Wellington. It was initially actually a public good, and it was run by and free, and people can put their rubbish out. Now it's run by privatised, and it's run by a Chinese company whose head office is in Bermuda. And so their taxes are in a tax haven, and they're not paying. The company's not paying taxes, neither here or there. But the workers do, of course, through income tax. So my concern is even if we were to look at investigate models such as making it run as a public trust, our concern is that in the future, whoever is elected and puts these structures and safeguards in place, in the future representatives may not do that, and they may decide to sell it off as an asset. So Warwick's going to speak to our specific recommendations, and I just want to encourage you all to please safeguard this essential vital source from being potentially privatised in the future. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ariana. I've got Warwick first, but I've got you on the list this year. Yep.
Your Worship and fellow councillors, water is perhaps the most important issue, or the water crisis is perhaps the most important issue this council has faced for over 30 years. There's some good recommendations in this report. We need to catch up with our lack of investment. We need to harvest rainwater. But some of them look like a crisis is being used to push an agenda this has been around for some time for the complete corporatisation of our water. And this agenda has been pushed in various ways since around at least 1997. I'd like to speak on rainwater harvesting, metering, institutional arrangements, and make some recommendations. The petition that the Wellington Residents Coalition presented in late 2010 did mention the use of tanks, the encouragement of the use of water tanks, and nothing has been done. That was 10 years ago. Tanks have two advantages. They can be used for grey water purposes, most easily for gardening, with a bit more expense and plumbing for flushing toilets, doing the laundry, etc. The other advantage is they can be used as stormwater retention. If you have some sort of stormwater retention, you don't have to let all the stormwater out at once. The pipes for stormwater, which is the most expensive form of reticulation of the three waters, don't have to be so big. So your investment, your longer term investment, may be less. Water metering. We warned many years ago that the council was spending things on beautifying the city at the expense of the necessities. We noted about bricks on Courtney Place, for example. Unfortunately, things were neglected, and now what is being proposed is to ask the consumer to pay for that neglect. This will lead to inequality. The tenants will have to pay as well as the owners. It's a further transfer of wealth from those who have property, from those who don't have property to those that do. it will not be cost neutral either. It'll cost money to install the meters. It'll cost money to maintain the meters. It'll cost money to administer the charging. So there are administrative and transaction costs. There has been some suggestion in the past that there be quotas above which you'd be charged for water and below which you wouldn't. That may be so now, but in the future, in say 10 years, they could go. I noticed that you, Your Worship, I think you were the only one who was on this council 10 years ago. In 10 years, most of you will be gone. And, oh, sorry, Councillor Pennant also, yes. But most of you will be gone, and somebody will say, let's get rid of the quotas. Institutional arrangements. Non-profit company, same thing. 10 years, oh, let's make it into a council-controlled trading organisation. We have forever been against corporatisation of water, and we believe the management and ownership of water assets should be under direct control of a publicly elected body. What would we like to do? We're going to have a public meeting on the 24th of January. We are asking you to scrub recommendations 15 and 16 from the report. Why we're asking doesn't go to consultation is there is a perception out there that once something goes into a proposal for consultation, it's adopted regardless of what the people who are consulted with say. Finally, please heed us, otherwise you may go down in history as the most right-wing council since Blumsky and Wild. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Warwick and Ariana. Are there any questions? Councillor Free, Councillor Pennant. Yep.
Thank you for that. And I didn't personally ever support water metering, so I am sympathetic to what you say. I want to know what your main concerns are. Is your main concern about water staying in public ownership and being enough quantities being available to those at the lowest end of the income stratum? Or are you actually just fundamentally opposed to water metering? And I guess I'm asking Warwick.
A bit of both. We're fundamentally opposed to water metering for the reasons it's not just about public ownership, it's about direct public control of water.
Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for your long service on this issue. Yeah. How many signatures did you get on your petition? Because you did a lot of work.
It was 17,899, I think it was, if I remember.
Councillor Rush, just get in there. Go.
If we take this to the next election and give it to a mandate, can we get a mandate to impose these? Would that be okay?
Oh well, I mean, that's what I wish. You could say, why didn't people stand on this election? Yeah, I mean, that's what we should be. That's what we should be discussing at elections. We should be discussing the big issues at elections, like that.
Thank you, Warwick and Ariana. And my recollection is that I don't think virtually anybody brought up water pipes. They promptly started breaking immediately after the election. So, councillors, what we're going to do is we'll adjourn now for strategy and policy, but we'll go to have a morning tea break. Jill, when do you want us to come back? Yep, 15 minutes. Okay, so 15 minutes. We'll start with strategy and policy.
Policy Committee meeting, which I imagine is going to be fairly brief. So just the usual process for strategy and policy to let the Democracy Advisor know if you're going to leave the meeting. So I just need to, I need to note that there's no apologies for this one. So I think everyone will be here for the whole thing. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? No. So I'm going to move the motion that the Strategy and Policy Committee approve the minutes of the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting held on the 10th of December 2020, having been circulated, and that they be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Matthews. So I'll now put, is there any debate? Thank you. I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded, and you can vote now. Councillor Wolfe and Councillor Young, you just have to vote to accept the minutes. And that's carried. Right, what we're going to do now is, got a frog in my throat. I'm going to ask Councillor Calvert to introduce this report and just suggest that, because we're going to be discussing this at Council, that you know, the rest of us may want to, thank you, may want to save our debate for then. But Councillor Calvert will explain the process and where we're up to now. Yes, do health and safety first, yep.
Thank you. And like with most things that have happened this year, everything's slightly delayed. So you have the health and safety report for the 12 months ending 30th of June. It's a most of you would have seen this, will be aware of it, and progress the council is making against health and safety. The systems in place are very mature, but that's not to say that we can't continue to improve. And we do have a new manager of health and safety, and as part of that, they're undertaking a review, and there will be an external review of our health and safety systems to ensure that we're still current and moving forward for the future. I think we can't go unmentioned, even though it's not really highlighted in this report, because it came in a separate report a few months ago, was our staff's response to the lockdown, initial lockdown for COVID-19. Now, this is something that no one had really any experience. We obviously had done all our pandemic planning, but when something like that happens, a lot of the systems and processes aren't in place. And knowing that we have roughly 1,500 staff and also associated contractors, it was really important that we looked after our own people so that they could look after others in the city. And I have to commend the officers for the work that they did on this. And as we all know, during lockdown, you didn't know whether it was Sunday or Monday at times. Everybody was working very long hours, and that in particular to our staff. And just want to highlight a couple of things, a few things that that was put in place. Was actually making sure that the organisation had identified our vulnerable workers and if they had any dependents during COVID, the initial lockdown. The organisation established a staff welfare response team, again to ensure that the organisation was doing the best it could for the people. They'd also developed a tool so they could check in with the staff on how they were feeling, on their well-being. Because we know that COVID, obviously there's a physical issues of catching COVID, but then there's also the mental impact on people, and not knowing whether they're going to be impacted on their families, and especially if people were working in high-risk areas for partners. And also how the organisation have adapted to flexible working and discussing discretionary leave as well. So, it is, and whilst it was just one part of the year, it was a really significant part of the year. And I just, as I said, like to commend the staff on, led by the Chief Executive and the Director of People and Culture, to provide the exemplary service that they did, and giving us as the governors the confidence that our health and safety system in the workplace is functioning, but we, as I said, we're not going to rest on our laurels. So I will move this paper and the recommendations, and Councillor Condi will be seconding.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to this very quickly? I just wanted to say that we all take our responsibilities around health and safety very seriously, but I can understand it's been a very busy time and not all of you may have had time to read the health and safety report, and just want to encourage you to have a look at it, because the latest report we've had is the first one that our new health and safety manager has prepared, and there are some changes to the previous reports. One of the things I really appreciated is that they're now including incident reports in there, which is a really useful way of seeing some of the kind of near misses or serious incidents that we've had in the organisation. It really brings home the realities of our responsibilities around that. I just wanted to acknowledge there's councillors who have been out on health and safety visits, particularly there was one about parking recently, which is my portfolio. I appreciate the councillors who went out and did that. And just acknowledging that, our parking staff and a lot of our frontline staff at the moment are dealing with a lot more verbal abuse than we've had to in the past. We've definitely seen that in the aftermath of COVID, and as you were talking about, Councillor Calvert, the wellbeing impacts on our whole community mean that there are a lot of people who are on a bit shorter fuse than we might prefer to be. We're not all being our best selves as much as we might like as a community that have experienced quite a lot of stress this year. And I just wanted to acknowledge Meredith and her team, because every time I ask a question at the health and safety briefing about anything to do with wellbeing, how we're looking after our staff who have to deal with kind of verbal abuse, they've always already thought about it. They've already got something in place. It gives me great confidence that that we're really on top of those concerns. So kia ora to that.
Anyone else wanting to speak to this paper? Councillor Paul.
Sorry, quite random, but I just wanted to just really mahi to Meredith and Barbara for your mahi, and I felt like throughout the lockdown that you were so supportive of staff, and I felt that they were really cared for and protected in what was a very scary time, and just really wanted to mahi to you, because I think you do an excellent job at making sure people feel safe but also valued, and so kia ora.
Anyone else like to speak? Councillor Calvert, would you like a rush reply?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Condi, for those comments and highlighting abuse as well. And I know around this table, and in particular, Councillor Matthews, has experienced that in the worst possible way. And I just want to, I think it's worth noting that Hamilton City Council put out a video from their own staff about the abuse that they're experiencing and the comments that are made to them. And I think we all need to, it's really worthwhile, because what it does is it gives you a sense of what's really happening also in the front line with our officers, and the constant abuse that they are receiving. And I suspect our council is no different to Hamilton City Council. And it's only a short video, 1 or 2 minutes, and I'll find the link and we'll share it again with you. I think you may have been sent it, but it is a very powerful message about what our staff have to face on a daily basis, and but in knowing that there are measures in place to support our staff through that, and obviously also probably for elected members as well. So so thank you, and I think we're ready to go to vote.
Yes, okay. So we'll now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded, we'll put that to the vote. Oh, Councillor Calvert, have you got yours?
Oh, did I not vote?
You've got mine. You've got I've just voted for him. So Councillor Wolf's lost yours.
No, she's got hers. I'm sure Diane must have hers, because I've got mine.
Oh, there's mine. I had both of them, sorry.
You just voted. You might just want to press the button.
Too many pieces of paper.
Okay, so that's carried.
Hey, it's Christmas.
That's for another time. I'd now like to ask Councillor Calvert to introduce the report of the draft annual report.
Thank you. And I will start with the title of the annual report. And thank you, Councillor Day, for help. Hopefully I do pronounce it correctly. Kia whaka tōmuri te hari whakamua, and I think I've just stuffed it up, but I apologise.
Apply for trying.
Sorry. But anyway, it is my past, is my present, is my future. And I think that is really appropriate because we have learnt an awful lot in this past 12 months, or the 12 months just to the end of June this year. And again, I raised the matter of COVID. We've also had some unexpected matters that have come to light, in particular the extent of our water infrastructure issues, which will be discussed in more detail through the Mayor's Taskforce report. And obviously through COVID, we had to fund additional operational expenditure that wasn't planned, and to be able to fund that, we've had to add that to our debt. We've also had to fund the unexpected repairs to the Mount Albert Tunnel, approximately $10 million there, and we've funded that. We've as debt, or added it to our debt. So essentially, what that's done is brought our deficit down, rather than coming in or having a surplus, to a $3.8 million deficit. But given the challenges that this council has faced over the previous financial year, an excellent result, and thank you to officers, because again, that would have been a lot higher if they hadn't been able to find additional savings. And bearing in mind that we're still asking them to find additional savings as we go into our long-term plan process. It was good that we were able to put a clear figure on the cab building, having received the insurance settlement of $33 million. And so at least that we know what we're dealing with there now. The Mayor did touch on, in the opening of the council meeting, the achievements for the calendar year, and I will just draw your attention. I won't read them out, but on page 5 under the Mayor's report, in some of the highlights that have happened during the year. If you don't read anything, the best pages to read in the annual report to give you a good summary, and that's pages 1 to 20, and then the rest is the detail that will fit in where the pages are summarised. Now, one of the things is normally what we would have, there are some changes since the Finance, Audit and Risk saw this report, and that's to the commentary around the Wellington, on measures in respect of water being managed by Wellington Water, and the staff are just handing those out here now. So, and we just got, apologies for the handwriting, but we just got the information first thing this morning. So essentially, the only information that's changing is around the commentary. And you'll see in this document here, the column here, the commentary has been adjusted. And then there is also some additional commentary that's going to be added to the annual report, which is on this A4 sheet. I don't expect you to be able to digest it all very now, but I suppose we have the trust in the officers that they've been through this. The important thing to note is those measures in red, or the results in red, haven't changed. So, but it's really just the commentary. So, in terms of you will, and the audit, we will be receiving in council the audit opinion. So I'm not going to discuss that here now in this meeting. Suffice to say, we do have an audit opinion, which is really good to see. But then, as I said, we'll discuss that at council, and that's when our auditor will also speak to council and explain the audit opinion. And that will be tabled at council. So I think it's, I think given the way the financial year went, I think it's an excellent result for our organisation. Once again, thank you to the officers for the results, because they wouldn't have been achieved that, and also the elected members, because it's good to see that we've got some good achievements in that as well. So I don't think there's much more to add. It's at this late stage. In previous years, what we would normally do is have the annual report adopted by the 30th of September, then published about a month later. There's been an exemption this year that we need to adopt our annual report by the 31st of December. So hence that it's pretty much done and dusted. So I'm hoping that no one's got any amendments to their report, because you've all had an opportunity to see it and to provide feedback to officers. So with that, I'll move the report, and I understand the Mayor will be seconding.
Thank you. Over to you, Mayor Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, look, just briefly, and thanks, Councillor Calvert, for all the introduction there. I just wanted to add my thanks to all the staff who've had such a huge amount of work that they've put into getting us to this position, because a document of this scale, it's a massive piece of work. There were some bits that we actually sent back to rewrite, and I just say, councillors, when we do that kind of thing, just be careful of how often we do that, because there's an immense amount of work that gets put into these things, and sometimes it causes some grief to the people who are actually having to rewrite things when they thought they'd done a great job in the first place. So my heartfelt thanks to all the staff who've been involved in putting it together. Councillor Calvert's also mentioned the issue around timing and water. And just if I can just say the one thing I wanted to say about the water one, we will not be the only council by any stretch of the imagination who has this kind of notation on their annual report. So there'll be quite a few more. Some of them possibly are not fully aware of that yet, but it's coming for a few. So that was really all I wanted to say on that. The other thing is just to say, I think it's not a tale of two halves, it's a tale of 1 3/4 and a 1 1/4, because clearly life changed completely and dramatically in the last quarter of the financial year, and I think the most severe immediate recession that this country has ever faced in a single quarter. So a lot of that's why we haven't achieved a lot of the targets that we're expected to achieve, because a whole lot of things got closed and we simply weren't able to do that. But I wanted to finish off by again saying, my praise for the staff, the council whānau, for all the work that has been done to keep the city operating during what has been an exceptionally challenging time. And I'll leave it there.
Kia ora. I imagine that people, if they want to debate, will save that for council. But is there anyone? I have to open it up to the floor. Nope. So you don't really need a right of reply then, Councillor Calvert. So let's vote on that. You got your own one. That's good. Keep an eye on you guys. You'll watch your back. So that's carried unanimously. And I'd just like to also thank councillors for your amazing hard mahi this year, and particularly want to thank councillors for their increased use of te reo Māori. We went pretty hard on Te Wiki Te Reo Māori, and it's been great to see that continue, so thank you. And I'd also like to thank Barbara and the staff for their support, Democracy Services, Cyrus, Jennifer, Donna, Heidi and Sean. Thank you so much for your amazing support that makes this committee just run so smoothly every week. We really appreciate it, and hope everybody has a well-deserved break. So I am going to conclude this meeting now, and I invite Mayor Foster to reconvene the council meeting, and the Karakia will be done at the end. But so we'll just adjourn for 2 minutes while we make sure we've got the right voting things and done. So thank you. And our water glasses.
Councillors, we are going to reconvene the council meeting, and I'm going to change the batting order so that we deal with the annual report first, for two reasons. One, it allows Karen to get away, and secondly, it allows the Chief Executive, who has a deadline which we may get through by the end of the time that her deadline is there, but we might as well make sure of it. So we'll deal with that first. Everybody happy with that? Yes. Good, okay. Karen, I think you're going to come up and speak to this. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, so I just need to introduce the paper, I think. That's the correct process. It's just, I'm sorry, I just worked through with the officers this morning on the process.
Which order are we going in, Karen? You or Diane first?
No, I introduce, and then I don't move the paper, I introduce it, and then Karen gets to present her opinion and changes.
Away you go. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I'll be upstanding. Look, thank you. Look, I've said it all about the annual report. I think it's you're going to be hearing from Karen Young, our auditor, on her opinion. So I will not be saying anything further, but we'll hand it over to Karen now to speak.
Karen.
Thank you, Chair and Councillor. I'm pleased to report that...
Can you get the microphone close to you? Close to you, because you're very softly spoken.
I'm very pleased to report that we've completed our audit of Wellington City Council's annual report for the year ended 30th June 2020. Our audit opinion. We intend to issue an unqualified audit opinion on the financial information, a qualified opinion on the statement of service provision. This is because we identified a number of significant issues with 4 water service performance measures reported by Wellington Water to the Council. The 4 measures and the issues are fault response times for water supply, wastewater and stormwater. Wellington Water was unable to accurately report on fault response times for each of the 3 waters. The information produced by their system used to report on the fault response times was not reliable because the fault response requests were not always recorded at the time they occurred. Second issue is to do with maintenance of the reticulation network for water supply. Wellington Water was unable to report a reliable water loss percentage for each of its 6 shareholding councils. This is due to the limited number of water meters across the reticulation network. Instead, the water loss percentage for the City Council was reported at a regional level. However, the reliability of the regional water loss percentage was also affected by the limited number of water meters across the region. 3, the total number of complaints received for water supply, wastewater and stormwater. Wellington Water was unable to accurately report the number of complaints for each of the 3 water services. Complete records of all complaints were not available because the Council only records the first complaint in relation to an event, the requirements to report every such complaint. And finally, the number of dry weather sewage overflows in relation to wastewater. Wellington Water was unable to accurately report the number of dry weather sewage overflows, as the system it uses for recording such events include blockages in the wastewater network. These blockages did not necessarily result in an overflow. So as a result of these issues, our work was limited and there was no practical audit procedures that we could perform to obtain assurance over the reported results for these 4 performance measures. In conclusion, other than the possible effect of these measures on the statement of service provision, the statement of service provision fairly presents the Council's performance for the year. Once Council adopts the annual report, we'll be in a position to issue our opinion. I would like to thank management, staff and the Council for all the cooperation and assistance we've received right throughout the year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Karen. Are there any questions of Karen, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Karen. I think it's useful to have that opinion. But I just wanted to ask you, you said Wellington Water was unable to record the number of complaints received, and then you said because Council only records the first time the complaint is registered. Could you please just unpack that a little bit more? What's the process that actually goes on there? Is it Wellington Water or is it our council?
So Wellington Water reports the performance measure results to the council. However, the council is the one taking the calls for the complaints. That information is passed to Wellington Water to tend to and resolve those complaints. So there's nothing that Wellington Water can do if the information is complete.
Completely get that. So when a customer rings council again to say, I complained about a leak, but it hasn't been fixed and 2 weeks has gone by, we must record that they've rung again, or are you saying we don't?
Okay, so so the requirement is that every complaint in relation to an event is recorded. So if you've got complainant ABC, complainant A will ring, the council would log that call, and then sometimes you have complainant B and C ring as well, because say, for example, there's an event which affects the whole street. So council only records complainant A's complaint. It passes it on to Wellington Water to tend to and resolve.
So are you suggesting that, in your view, a better process would be that complainant B and complainant C are also connected somehow or logged as fresh? Yeah, anyway, I'm just interested because obviously this is serious enough for you to highlight it. So,
DIA mandatory rules require that all complaints in relation to an event are recorded.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Thank you.
Councillor Rush?
Thanks, Karen. I really appreciate, I know that you've worked really hard and closely and at times in difficult circumstances, so I really appreciate the work you've done.
Welcome.
Just on these issues with Wellington Water, do you have a good feeling that these will be addressed by the next time we come to do our audit?
So Wellington Water have proposed how they're going to resolve these issues. Our expectation is that the majority of them will be, because we are into the 2021 financial year. Some may not be able to be addressed fully. In particular, fault response times is one where you record at a point in time, so it's pretty tricky to go back. And, our advice to not only Wellington Water but clients is sometimes because it's not practical and possible or cost beneficial to go back, focus on moving forward and addressing issues going forward.
Can I just follow up, Your Worship?
Sorry, hang on. Tom's going to help us there too.
Going forward, we've got those systems.
I just wanted to reiterate as well that one of those performance measures is dependent on the installation of water meters, so that won't be achieved within the next financial year. Cool.
Councillor Panner.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks from me too, Karen. I know you've spent a lot of time on this.
Welcome, Karen.
And it has been a difficult year. Look, I have spoken to Wellington Water because obviously this isn't ideal. Do you believe the organisation has the capability to resolve these issues by next year with the qualifications, obviously, that you've already made?
Yes, they do, and they'll be seeking some external assistance as well. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Sorry, can you just elaborate on what you said to Deputy Mayor Ferry about the DIA, the failure to meet? Is it a DIA reporting measure?
So, Councillor, all these 4 performance measures are DIA performance measures. They're part of the 2013 mandatory rules.
Can you just explain how how Wellington Water's failed to meet them?
I guess it's about putting systems and processes in place and with some of the measures. With others, such as the water loss one, which Tom spoke about, additional water meters is required. There is so very few water meters that Wellington Water has reported the information as a region, and even then it's got a quite a big confidence interval. So additional water meters are needed.
And you mean on network as opposed to residential, don't you?
Residential as well. Definitely residential, because the only way to get accuracy is to have water meters.
So are you saying
that's not a decision, I guess, for Wellington Water.
Are you saying that the only way to meet the DIA standards is to have residential water meters?
Well, there needs to be more water meters, and yes, residential. That's the way the DIA measures are currently calculated.
But it can't be right that the DIA measure requires residential water meters, because that's a decision for us, not imposed by them, right?
Well, the DIA measure uses the bench loss methodology, which relies on water meters, and that's residential and commercial.
Just to say that, it's actually, I think the measure is a minimum of 5% sampling on residential.
Okay, of the network.
Yeah.
Okay, which we have some, right? What percentage do we have now? Do you know?
So actually, you've got so few water meters that it's
not a
0.3%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's quite a short form.
There's a number within the region, but not within the city. But it's 5%. It's not.
Cool. And I guess I'm just interested, given we're going to debate the Mural Taskforce soon, on your impressions of the kind of culture within the council and Wellington Water, given the failings. Like, do you think that there is acceptance of the need for radical change and a massive cultural shift, or are you still getting a because I've got a lot of, particularly from Wellington Water, quite a lot of defensive. Is that a culture that you're seeing?
Karen, if you don't feel that you want to respond to that, you're welcome not to. That's the advice I've got.
Yeah, that's probably not a question for me. May I leave that to management to address?
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Certainly, there's a piece of work on to build our intelligent climate function within Wellington City Council to enable a relationship with Wellington Water, to enable a cultural alignment and enable better performance. So,
Councillor Condie and Deputy Mayor Ferry.
Thanks. Karen, just particularly on this water loss measure, I can't imagine that we suddenly have fewer water meters this year than we had last year, and yet last year we didn't receive a qualified opinion for this. So is this a matter that's been given, obviously, additional attention from Audit New Zealand this year? And could you talk more about that?
We've certainly looked at the measure more closely, not only at Wellington Water, but across councils as well. And that's because we identified some issues last year, like I said, not only at Wellington Water, but other councils. And so when we do that, we look at it further.
So just to clarify, this is something that then is being given extra attention across New Zealand. This is not just to focus on Wellington City Council or Wellington Water's measures. It's something that the Office of the Auditor General has asked auditors to look at more closely across the country.
And there's systems, processes, and probably the environment as well, because water loss is an important measure. And when I speak about the environment, it's about climate change, the weather weather patterns have changed, which means it's more important. Also, from a financial point of view, we all know that there's fewer leakages, then you don't need to. You can delay the finding of a new water source or building of tanks to store water.
Deputy Mayor Ferry.
I'm actually just struggling to work out how installing 5% of water meters is really going to calculate or give you a better idea about the water loss, given that the water loss can occur in lots of different ways. I've just dealt with a leak at my place, which actually probably wouldn't have been picked up by a water meter because it was in the mains coming to the house. And also, how does it help? You may just be in a situation where you're using more water, the meter reading will be variable. How is it actually an actual practical assistance with 5% of water meters?
So the 5% sampling of residential meters, so that's the formula put together by DIA in its bench loss calculation. So that's not something that we determined.
Mr. Williams can help out. Because this must be a problem over the whole of New Zealand. I can imagine there are a lot of councils without water meters that are failing their audits if this is what's required.
So I think this 5% sampling is, and then extrapolating that is a very, very crude, ineffectual measure. But it's the measure that's kind of stipulated by DIA. The way to actually understand the integrity of your network and the actual proper, more accurate water loss is through the inclusion of a greater number of meters.
Okay.
So the measure and our approach and the optimal approach are not necessarily the same thing.
But surely it still relies on people noticing something strange with their metering and actually reporting a leak.
To ultimately detect the leak, yeah.
Okay, I think this is not making sense to me, particularly from a technical point of view, but maybe it's...
I do understand. I think the measure stipulated by DIA is not a particularly effective measure for engaging the integrity of your network.
And for Karen, does this mean that every single council in New Zealand that has less than a 5% water metering penetration across their network is going to fail an audit like this? Or are we unusual?
Well, across the region, there's only 400 residential water meters, which only represents 0.03% of the residential meters sampled. So I probably can't comment about other councils. I guess this is a measure of the condition of the reticulation network. It's only a measure. There are many measures which, some better, which measures the condition of the network.
But I guess what I'm asking about is consistency of treatment across New Zealand, actually. Are you aware of other areas of New Zealand where they're going to fail audits because they don't have 5% of metering?
It's possible. It's possible, but that's not, I guess, the only way. There are DIA rules, and I guess there could be other ways in which the performance measures are unable to be calculated.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll...
Okay, councillors, thank you. I'll get Councillor Calvert to now introduce the report.
Thank you. And really, I'm just going to keep it very simple. You've got hopefully, can you bring the recommendations up on screen just so everybody's aware of them? Because they're not in the papers. Thank you. And I'd also like just to remind councillors that we did have an in-depth conversation with Wellington Water as well about their data and how they were have measures in place to improve their data capture going forward. But it is what it is at the moment, and given the extraordinary scrutiny on our water infrastructure, and that will be being discussed later on. I think it's now time to move on. We need to adopt the annual report. We need to accept the auditor's findings, whether we like them or not, but it is what it is. So I will move these recommendations, and the Mayor will be seconding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. I've already spoken in the Strategy and Policy Committee, so I won't add anything else. Councillors, is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the report?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for all the work that's gone on, but I do just want to comment about the question I just asked around the auditor, around her perception of the culture in Wellington Water and Wellington City Council. And I'm not going to press it more here today, but I just want to make the point that one of the findings of the Mural Taskforce and one of the main takeaways for me is that we mustn't shy away from asking difficult questions. So I just want to sort of put everyone, and particularly the Mayor, on notice that I'm not going to keep shying away from that, and I'll accept it in this instance because we have gone over it in detail, and she has given us her qualified audit, and we do have the details there. But it's particularly important to me that, particularly around water infrastructure, based on the findings of the Mural Taskforce, that we are not shy about asking difficult questions.
Councillor, it is always good to ask difficult questions in the right place as well. Councillor Rush.
Just on that note, because I wasn't going to say anything, but I absolutely accept that you should continue asking difficult questions. But what I would say is that I have been trying to improve the relationship. Not to say that my predecessor, threw me a bad relationship, but I've got my own style of working, and it's but it's. I tend to be very supportive of the folks at Wellington Water, but behind the scenes I follow up and carefully monitor what's going on. So I'd just like to assure you it's a bit of a balancing act between getting the best out of the team, but also ensuring. So, but please continue asking those difficult questions, but be assured I ask them too.
Deputy Mayor Ferry.
Yeah, look, thank you, and I think it's a really good, just to speak about the report generally, I think it's a heartening, actually, given the circumstances that we've been through, that we've ended up in a slightly better financial position than we might have expected. There clearly have been challenges, and when I stood for council, I realised that this was going to be the year, the triennium, to fix things, and actually all I really promised my community was that we would fix things, and sure enough, that was prescient. I didn't quite know how much we were going to have to fix, but even then it was obvious to me that there were issues with our pipes and our water, and I think that we've done a lot to start to uncover that, and there clearly is more to be done, but without actually fearlessly examining what needs to be fixed, and that is some of the processes clearly within our council that need to be fixed, as well as some very strong consideration of whether we do need more information through metering. We probably do. Where does that go, and how do we manage that? And also, clearly, Wellington Water, we need to be providing them the money and the resources to get on and do the things that they need to do, and we need to develop that trust and confidence that and that partnership to allow that to succeed. Because one of the things I realised, I've had my water cut off for a day and a half. I've been using my emergency water to flush my loo. I've been when the water's been briefly turned on, I've been filling up containers, and it actually has made me realise how fundamental water is, and we take it for granted. And your house very quickly gets unhealthy if you don't have water. It's hard to keep your sink clean and just lots of things. It's really, really fundamental. And in fact, this council was set up back in the 1840s to address unsanitary water. That's actually a fundamental reason, the inroading why councils were set up. And when we do our annual plan, I think it's really incumbent on us to actually think very hard about where we're going to spend our money. And I want to see a big focus on the things that are fundamental to our council that no other organisation in the city can actually deliver. It's our core business, and we need to be really focused on that through our annual and our long-term plan. So thank you for the fearlessness with which this has been done, Karen. This is challenging, but I thank you for coming to this conclusion, which I know was well considered. Thank you to our other staff and who've worked very hard on this too, and to my colleagues who've worked in the water space, and of course Councillor Calvert, who's been pretty fearless and lots of things that she does. Thanks.
Councillor Pennant.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Look, Councillor Fitzsimons, through the chair, of course you should keep asking hard questions, as you should also, of course, about transport, housing and waste and so on, and I welcome that. And I'm disappointed that you found the culture difficult because, you know, my experience was that they were very constructive, open to challenge. I hit them literally over the head over climate change. Every time, every meeting, no violence, but yeah, sorry, just an expression that they were open to challenge and then made some changes. So obviously they are on a journey path. We started off with capacity in 2004, have started to make some improvements since 2014, but obviously there's a way to go, and this isn't good enough. Obviously, it's not good enough. So I did take the liberty of talking to the chair to express that view, and I think I can assure my colleagues that they are very well aware that they do need to lift their performance for next year, that they cannot continue to get reports like this. Still a little bit unclear about, from the auditor, the advice around the water meters, but we can work through that. So I think, and just also, let's always celebrate the things that do go well as condemn the things that don't go well. They have done some good things, and we'll talk to that later, but of course it is absolutely good to keep people to account.
Councillor Day.
Kia ora. I just wanted to reflect on what a year we've had, and reading this report was actually a really good way to do that, but also to reflect on what we've managed to achieve despite a really difficult time. And I just want to acknowledge the people who put the report together and the things that have been highlighted. And interesting to read the page on the daily health checks of the korora. Wellington City Council has continued to make sure that we care for everyone and everything in our city, despite the fact that we've been facing one of our biggest challenges ever. So I just really want to acknowledge the staff for the work they've done to tell the story of what has been happening in this city, and amongst everyone else being focused on trying not to get sick. But also just want to acknowledge on page 12, thank you, that when you look at it, for $7.14 per person a day, that's what it costs to for our operational costs to per resident per day, $7.14. And when you reflect on that, gosh, our residents get pretty good value for money with everything they get. And I think it's important that we remember that when we have to consider the challenges to our budgets, that actually people are getting a really good deal in Wellington, and it is tricky. We've got some really big challenges ahead of us, but we have to remember that the collective power is better than the individual. So we need to keep focused on that. And I just want to also acknowledge the leadership of Councillor Calvert in keeping this process moving. I know it's a big beast to work with when you're looking at a year, and then particularly the year that we've had in managing that. So thank you for leading that.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Day. Councillor Calvert, right of reply.
Thank you, and being fearless as usual, I will. I have to say, I think this council is well equipped to continue to ask difficult questions. I see it happening all the time, and we certainly have got a number of forums, and not just at council, but through our workshops and through our interaction, through our portfolio leaders, and I for one do appreciate Councillor Rush's unique style. She's sitting next to me, and I'm sure will help continue to develop the relationship with Wellington Water. And as Deputy Mayor Ferry said, water is our core business. So it is an important part of our annual report, but we are moving forward. And in light of our the title of our annual report, and which is my past is my present is my future, kia whakatomori te haere whakamua, that I think it's very telling, and so we need to learn from the past as we go into the future. And so I hope that everyone will agree to adopt this annual report, because just to let you know on the process is we have until the 31st of December. So if you don't accept it now, you're coming back before Christmas.
Yeah, then we'll certainly be in the naughty book. Yeah. Councillors, if you can vote, please. Thank you. Now we've got some papers to sign. We're going to do that. And Karen, can I just finish off by saying thank you for all your immense amount of work and for the way in which you keep in touch and engaged with our organisation, and to wish you as well a very happy, safe and restful Christmas. Thanks, Karen.
Happy Christmas and safe holidays. Thank you.
Kia ora. Okay, councillors, we'll go to the notice of motion. You ready, Councillor Young? Yes, absolutely. Go for it.
God, same microphone problem again. So most of you won't know that I have a number of sailing qualifications that I have done in my time. And I'd have to tell you that KiwiRail's announcement this morning took the wind out of my sails. However, I am not becalmed. So when I first heard about KiwiRail's proposal for a single-user ferry terminal at King's Wharf, downtown Wellington, for its new rail-enabled ferries, I thought it was a joke, and then realised actually it wasn't a joke at all. And I remember when I was a child in Wellington, we couldn't get onto the waterfront. When the Esmeralda, what turned out to be the Chilean prison ship, came into the waters, it came into the harbour, we had to go up Mount Victoria to see it because we couldn't go down on the waterfront. And then when I was a young journalist doing shipping arrivals and departures, a highlight of my career, I was the only woman on the waterfront who wasn't there overnight. So the waterfront has changed enormously over the years. I hope you understood what I was saying there. So now the waterfront is really Wellington's playground, and the tranquil waters of the inner harbour are home to some of the most popular water sports. Dragon boaters, rowing teams, waka ama, yachties, canoers, and even some hardy swimmers, plus all the people who like to promenade around the waterfront. So the purpose of this notice of motion is to add our political voice in support of the Kaiwharawhara option chosen by the Future Ports Forum, comprising the Greater Wellington Regional Council, Centreport, the New Zealand Transport Agency, Blue Bridge Ferries, and the Wellington City Council. We are all singing the same song. We don't want these mega ferries in our inner harbour. KiwiRail has now thrown in the towel, and I'd like to think that this notice of motion was the final nail in the coffin. Sorry about all these cliches, but they just, they kind of worked for me this morning. Yeah.
I thought they should be.
So what I didn't realise until I read the officer version of my their much more technical version of my notice of motion, I'll come back to that in a moment, is that the waterfront is Wellington's biggest urban space, 2.2% of the city's street space. And we don't want it turned into an industrial area. Marshalling yards for ferries that operate 24 hours a day are very noisy things to have in the centre of a city. Plus, we would have things like there'd be none of those water activities, and we'd have huge ferries doing donuts right in front of our inner harbour. However, lest you are mistaken, I love trains. I've had some great train trips in my life, but I don't want them crossing Waterloo Quay, and I don't want all those cars and trucks being disgorged into our inner city streets. Grade separation has been suggested as a solution, and in layman's English, that's a flyover. And we all
Councillor, I'll give you an extra
about
minute.
Wellington's views on flyovers. Thank you. So it's no surprise that Wellingtonians were outraged at this proposal. And no, I can't quite read my handwriting. I do accept that the now accepted location of Kaiwharawhara has higher seismic risks because of the Wellington fault. But that fault is a risk for many Wellingtonians, not least the incumbents of Premier House. I was delighted to have the unanimous support of my council colleagues and a lot of officer support. How often does that all come together? I'm very grateful to the council officers for their help in drafting this paper, in particular Moana Maki and Cyrus Freer. So now I'd like to join me and Councillor Jill Day, who is seconding the paper, in expressing formal support for the new multi-user terminal, ferry terminal, to be sited at Kaiwharawhara, and asking the Mayor to relay our decision to the two shareholding ministers, the Honourable David Parker and the Honourable Grant Robertson, who is, of course, also the Member of Parliament for Wellington Central. So thank you. I would like your support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Day.
Kia ora anō. I would like to begin...
I've got my David's mother.
Got it sorted. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking Councillor Young for her successful advocacy and also for creating harmony amongst council on this issue. So well done. It's amazing to see it happen in front of our eyes. I also just want to note that I've had people over the last couple of weeks since this was in the media that they love our waterfront and that they're really pleased to see that council has spoken out and the regional council and said that this is it's a very important thing that we pay attention to and that we really focus on making sure that our city and our waterfront stays amazing and livable for everybody. I think also Councillor Young spoke about the issues of the trains going through, but also as a user of the ferries, I regularly travel to the South Island on the ferry. Traffic issues are a problem for the people trying to get onto the ferry as well, and I think by bringing people further into our city, we cause more anxiety for people who want to use the ferries. And we know that many people who travel on the ferry come to the city, get on the ferry, and also get off the ferry and leave quite quickly. So why would we take them through the centre of the city? I also want to acknowledge and agree with the Chair of the Regional Council, Darren Ponta, about the earthquake issues, and that actually, yes, it is a significant fault, but if we have a significant earthquake on that, this is not going to be our only and main issue. There will be ways around managing that through that time, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we need to make sure that the city works and functions for the people who live here and for the people who come through. So thank you again, Councillor Young, for your leadership on this and working with the community and across organisations. Really appreciate your leadership.
Thanks. I just got to say a few words too. When Councillor Young raised this a couple of months ago, I was very supportive of that, and I'm delighted to see that every councillor has signed the notice of motion. And actually, this has been council's formal position since August-ish, but a formal position that we've actually taken for a good year and a bit. So it's good to reiterate that. And I think really what we're saying to KiwiRail, and I think they've realised that now, is that they were in one space and everybody else was in a different space. So us, Greater Wellington, Centre Port, NZTA as well, we're all saying, hey, we think Kaiwharawhara is the right place. And look, I respect their comments around the seismic vulnerability of Kaiwharawhara. However, we're not just talking about King's Wharf as the alternative proposition. Actually, when you go down to Centre Port, it actually would have stretched all the way out across what is was the former business park. That didn't fare too well in the Kaikoura earthquake either. So there were some serious vulnerabilities, regardless of where you put the ferry terminal. But I think it was great that they made the announcement they did today, and they also said, let's get on with this with pace. And I think that is now the challenge and the opportunity for all the parties to say, right, let's work out the detail of this, because this thing has been in a black box for quite some time. I know, when I was formerly looking after transport, it was like, well, what's going on? It's buried in an officer hole there between the organisations, if they were actually talking to each other at all about what was going to happen, because it has significant implications for the rail system, for the roading system, for the way in which the land is laid out, for the way in which Centre Port is laid out. And I know that one of Centre Port's major concerns was that if it had been King's Wharf, it would have actually had a fundamentally detrimental impact on the operation of the port as a whole and its viability. So I think it would be really good to get on with this. It's obviously a critical bridge between North and South Islands, but it's also a critical gateway for our city. And I think at the moment you have to look at it and say we now have a really great gateway at the airport end, we have a pretty mediocre gateway buried underneath underneath an overbridge, and it's a pretty rudimentary set of buildings as well. So I'm looking forward to having something that actually we can all be proud of in the next couple of years, and we can do that at pace. So thank you, Councillor Young, again for bringing the notice to motion. We've had three speaking in favour. I'm going to ask the question of whether anybody wishes to speak against it. I'm conscious of the time, Councillor Pannett. Okay, right. Yeah, but then I will ask you whether you're speaking in favour. You're speaking against, so you're speaking against the notice of motion. Decide.
Rather than, and I'll be brief.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm just going to check that because I'm asking you whether you're speaking for or against and which way you're going to vote.
Well, actually, Mayor Foster, I'm allowed to speak to a motion and I want to raise some concerns and to ask some questions.
Yes, well, standing orders actually says that once 3 people have spoken in favour of something, I then need to call for somebody
I'm going to
I
vote
can
against
call.
it.
You're going to vote against it?
Yeah.
Right, okay, cool, thank you.
Come on,
Councillor.
Mayor Foster. I don't cheer like that.
No, I did ask
it's
people whether they
unhelpful.
want to do that. So, yeah.
I'm going to raise some questions. So first of all, Councillor Young, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and certainly I did not support the King's Wharf option. That was ludicrous. However, we still have some problems, and I was a little bit concerned to hear Chair Ponta talking about a rapid consenting process. I have consistently been opposed to that sort of thing. I think it shuts the public out, and it also doesn't necessarily result in some of the best solutions that we can possibly have. The kaiwharawhara option is not an easy option, and so while it might be better than what we've got, I didn't actually support it when we came through because of the massive resilience issues. And I guess it's not just this council, but internationally, that we're still not that good at preparing for climate change and earthquakes, and we've got both coming at us. The response from KiwiRail to my question today, I mean, I'm sure they will do the work, but, it would be, before we start expressing support, it would be good to actually have that data in front of us. So, look, it's a little bit difficult because issues are more complex than one way or the other. I'm glad that we got a better outcome today. I think it was great that KiwiRail were responsive. But until I see more data, until I see more good, robust planning evidence, I think we just need to make sure that we're a little bit temperate in our support and what the option is. We have made some interesting planning decisions recently, and my challenge is that we need to be really robust on this because we know these problems are coming at us now very fast.
Right reply, Councillor Young.
So look, really briefly, I'd just like to say thank you for your support for those who did support. So I'm just gobsmacked by Councillor Pannett, who says she supports the fact that we're not going to have it at King's Wharf and then uses it as a vehicle to express her well-known views on climate change and rising sea levels. We're talking about the location of the ferry, one of the most critical parts of our infrastructure, and I cannot understand what the hell is going on, basically. So anyway, each to his own, but I'm glad the rest of you are with me, and Councillor Pannett can vote against it, although she actually supports the decision, so work that one out. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, if you can vote, please. Vote that way? Okay. 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 Councillors I've been asked just to take a couple of minute adjournment, so we'll do that just for a quick comfort stop, because I know that not everybody had a break before. Okay. Councillor Paul.
That's a good one. All right, just going to start. So yeah, kia ora koutou. So today I'm bringing forward this paper, which is about the terms of reference for the Regional Climate Change Working Group. So we've been meeting since the beginning of the triennium, and so basically we just talk about regional issues to do with climate change, obviously. It's chaired by Thomas Nash from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and yeah, so he's brought some really good new direction to this group to give it more purpose and more direction and more meaningful collaboration and partnership between the various parties who are members of the group, so that's awesome. I really want to thank Tom Pettit and Alison Howard for all of the support that they've provided to make sure that when we're going to these meetings that we're really being able to celebrate the work that we're currently doing, but also seek out new solutions and partnerships, because we know that regionally there are lots of people that come into Wellington, and we want to make sure that their movements and activities while here are aligned with our own targets. So the Regional Growth Framework has given us a real purpose, and we've been tasked with some pretty big projects for the next 2 years. One of those are the Regional Adaptation Plan, which will start with a risk assessment of the region, which will align with our own work on our district plan, particularly around hazards. So I know that will make Councillor Pannett very happy to have that, in writing, so that everyone is aware of sea level rise and storm surges and all of those things. So that's one project that we'll be working on, and we'll also be looking at a Te Atakura, but for the region, so a region-wide reduction plan for emissions, and we want it to be really ambitious because currently we're the only TA in the region who have set targets for our entire city and not just for our own organisation. So we want to be really ambitious, and we want to make sure that our reductions plan for the region is one that takes account of all of our emissions and not just our own organisational ones. So I just want to say that we're not leading in the region when it comes to climate change. Actually, I would say that Kapiti Coast are actually leading us at the moment, and as the capital city, I think we should be leading the country in this space. So hopefully with these plans and with the support of the region, we'll be able to be more leading in this space. And I want to thank Councillor Dave for seconding this paper, because there are some pretty awesome approaches to Te Tiriti partnership and bringing on all the mana whenua partners across the region, which isn't an easy task, but there's some real talent out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do in this group. So I look forward to you supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Day.
My right to speak.
Is there anybody else who wants to speak? If you want to speak, then you speak now. Otherwise, no. I didn't imagine that they would. Oh, right. I was imagining it would be all those in favour. I against, no carry. Anyway, Councillor Rush.
I support a forum. I support it being informed by the evidence. We do have, we're lucky here in Wellington to have a lot of experts in the field. So the NIWA folks, the chaps and women at Vic University. I am concerned about the number of people identifying as mana whenua, and I'm concerned about the cost that is involved. I'm also, I suppose, a little bit concerned about how the makeup of this group is selected, the use of co-chairs, which is a very Green Party. I know you love that. And I also note that on the whole, I think it's a good forum, but I think it needs to be transparent and it needs to show some deliverables. So that's all I'll say for now.
Councillor Day.
Kia ora. I will just respond to a couple of those comments. Councillor Rush, you said you're concerned at the number of iwi representatives on it. I think if you consider what iwi have seen happen over 150 years, what they've seen is the ability to be outnumbered, and actually what this is doing is trying to set things back on a more even keel. We won't even be at the even keel with that, but I think it's really exciting to see that iwi want to participate and are interested in being involved in this conversation. I think it's important that that we acknowledge that there are different views around the region, and that actually for iwi it is much easier to see things at a regional perspective. But absolutely we need to be partnering and working with iwi, and I'm really pleased to see the Regional Council taking some leadership in this and helping to manage it. And you're concerned about cost. I think the cost of not doing it is greater, so I think we just need to get on and address this and work with all organisations and iwi constructively, and I completely support this, and I thank Councillor Paul for her leadership on this, and I'm really excited to see this coming through on a paper actually, so thank you. Kia ora. And I also want to thank officers, because I know there's a lot of work that goes on in the background, making sure that everybody's talking to each other and that they know what's happening, so thank you.
Councillor Paul, right to reply.
Yeah, look, just briefly, all I'll say is what I've got to say in the introduction to the paper is that it is really exciting that we'll be able to have that advocacy power of having all of the partners within the region to go to central government and advocate for the various levers that we need within the city and within the region to hit our targets. But all I'd say to you is that we do have deliverables. I said at the beginning, we're going to have our adaptation plan and also our reduction plan. So it's good to really have that purpose. And as always, you're more than welcome to come along if you wanted to, because I know that this is an area that you're really interested in. So you're more than welcome to come along to observe. And also thank you to Councillor Foon, who does that as well, and to have your input, because these are going to be significant plans and have significant potential. So yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillors will vote now. That's unanimous. Thank you. Right. Councillors, I'm going to now move to the next item, which is, we'll put it up if we can. Right. Taskforce on Three Waters. Yeah. Look, ko te wai te ora nā mea katoa. Water is the life giver of all things. And look, I'm absolutely delighted to be now at the stage of being able to formally introduce this paper to you, the Taskforce report to you, after all the work that we've done during the year. Just to go back a little bit in the history, of course, we had a number of significant pipe breaks during the last Christmas period, and that led to the formation of the Taskforce, which we approved at this council on the 26th of February. We moved really quickly to establish the Taskforce. It had its first meeting on the 18th of March, and then 7 days later we moved into lockdown, so that kind of disrupted the first couple of months. But then we got back into meetings, sometimes by Zoom and sometimes in person. The first stage of our work was to gather information, so we made sure that we were making decisions on the basis of good information, and the second stage was to cogitate on the information and to work out what it was that we were going to say. In terms of the Taskforce membership, there was myself as chair, Councillor Condi, Councillor Rush were the two councillors. We had Jeff Dangerfield, who was the chair of Wellington Water, David Bassett, who is the chair of the Wellington Water Committee, which governs Wellington Water, John Milford, CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, Hikatea Raupata from Ngāti Toa, Kara Pukatapu Dentist from Taranaki Whānui, and Eugene Doyle, who I recognise in the audience as one of our community representatives. We also had Stu Farrant as a community representative, who you will also know is involved in some of the Whaitua work. And brought significant expertise in that role. And then three independent subject matter experts, Carl Blanchard from PwC, Peter Leslie, who is with PDL Consulting, but also was a former director alongside me on Capacity, which is the predecessor to Wellington Water, and Martin Dunn. And so I want to express my thanks to all of those members, because they went above and beyond, and particularly the work that was done in writing up the document. I particularly want to recognise Councillor Condi and also Eugene, but also Peter Leslie, who did a huge amount of work in that writing piece of work. I also wanted to recognise Gary McDonald, who was essentially there as our independent expert for us to be sort of outside of the organisation. And particularly I want to also recognise Mike Mendonça, who did an immense amount of work in putting this together, and we could not have done what we've done without Mike's huge work. I know there were a number of other council officers, but I particularly want to single out Mike for the huge amount of work that he did, both in the writing, the researching, pulling the meetings together, and that was absolutely invaluable. So Mike, thank you, and Eugene, thank you as well. What we've got in front of us is a set of recommendations to be worked through, and you'll see that the recommendation basically is to receive the report. It's not to pull it apart; it's to receive it. But it is to note that officers are going to do more work on the recommendations which are in there. So in receiving it, it doesn't mean that you've signed up to anything in particular, but it does mean that officers are going to do more work and to bring those items back. Our findings were unanimous. We batted them around as to how hard we were going to go, and that we decided actually we will give it warts and all. And we would say this is what we think, and then council, it is up to you to decide how fast things get done and what gets done from that. What were the key findings? We have made 48 recommendations, and the key finding, I guess you could say, is that the status quo is not going to cut it. We need to change, and we need to change significantly. So the first thing is we need to make sure that we actually understand what it is. It's out of sight, it's out of mind until it breaks. And when it breaks, we hear about it. And the evidence is that we've actually, in the past few years, when I was on the Board of Capacity, and Peter and I recall this, we spent a lot of time putting CCTV cameras down pipes to understand what was going on there. We were introducing area water meters, so we actually had as good a picture as we could get of what the state of the asset was. But what's clear is that over time, that investment in condition assessment has been squeezed. And so that means pipes may be getting close to failure and they're not picked up until they actually do fail. And we saw that in spades with the Willis Street failure. Moa Point got mighty close with the interceptor there, but in fact they did the condition assessment. They said, "Hey, this pipe's getting a bit thin. We need to work on this." So they went and got stuck into that, and that was essential. Mount Albert's slightly different in the sense that that may well have been earthquake damage, but also it wasn't an old pipe. It was only barely 20 years old, and yet it failed. But there will always be failures. I guess the key thing here is that we need to understand the condition of those assets. We need to be focused on the critical assets so that we pick them up before they fail, not after they fail. So monitoring is utterly critical. And of course, Council, we have not sat on our hands on this. The government investment has been put largely into this area, and also we've put more money into this year, the annual plan in the year that we're currently in, for condition assessment and for roving crews. So we have not been sitting idle. Second finding was that, and this is no surprise, we've been underinvesting, and we're not unique in this, but we've really shone the spotlight on that the depreciation level, the amount of money we've been collecting from depreciations up here, and the renewal level has been significantly below that for a consistent period of time. In fact, I think you could say that since the first pipe was laid in the city, we have been underinvesting in renewals, and so we need to put more money into that. Now that is going to cost ratepayers more, and I've certainly seen the question, is this going to cost more? Yes, it is going to cost more, because if we keep spending at the rate we're spending, we are going to keep on seeing the asset continue to age, and we can't have that. And I think that our community has been telling us we need to do something about this, and so we are setting the framework for doing that. The third area that we focused on is that we are now, as population is growing, we're getting closer and closer to the maximum limit that we can afford in terms of our storage capacity. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, but as our population is growing, it's now getting closer and closer. We need to do something about that. What does that mean? It either means we invest a lot of money and potentially some environmental impacts, or we change our demand patterns. And that's one of the places that water metering comes in. The second place that it comes in is we actually need to understand, and you heard from Karen earlier, we need to understand more about what actually is going, what level of water leakage there is. And at the moment, it's anything between 6 and 31%, which is completely hopeless. We need to be much more specific about that. We've also heard from Wellington Water that something like 80 or 90% of the water that leaks doesn't ever get to the surface, it's leaking into the ground. And so we actually need to understand more about what is being lost, and therefore where we can target, and therefore where we can actually, we can get stuck into that early to reduce that level of water loss. We heard from the Residents' Coalition today that water is free. Well, no, it isn't free. It appears as a compulsory item on every one of our rates bills for those who are property owners. And we keep hearing from people saying that renters are ratepayers too. So you can't then turn that around the other way and say, well, actually, renters don't pay for this part. They do. They pay for it in the rents. So it's not free at the moment. What we're trying to do, this is not some sort of conspiracy. What we're trying to do is to reduce the overall cost of water supply by trying to make sure we don't have wastage in the system. And that's what this is all about. And of course, the recommendations don't say do it. They do say do the business case, and they say consult. And there's a recommendation to consult with our community as part of our long-term plan next year. The next area which I wanted to touch on just briefly is that we confirmed, and this is not news to anybody, and Eugene has certainly been highlighting that particularly for the Ferry catchment, but it's true across all of our catchments, that the wastewater is leaking out of old pipes, public pipes and private pipes into our stormwater system, into our stream network, into our coastal waters, and we are going to need to address that. It's very clear that there's recommendations here about the national standard, national freshwater standards, and we've said that we need to meet those national freshwater standards. It will take some time to do that. There's a time frame to do it, but we need to get stuck into doing that because the past practices are no longer acceptable. And we said in there that we've embraced the principle of te mana o te wai. The other part that I've mentioned there is that this is something that all of us need to be part of. It's not just the council, it's not just Wellington Water, it's every Wellingtonian needs to be part of this because we've got to be careful about what we stick down our stormwater systems, what we stick down our wastewater systems. And you noted in the report here, the changes that were circulated by Karen, one of those is what goes into the water system due to a number of blockages within the network and at pump stations caused by rags, fat and root infiltration. Well, roots will grow, but the stuff that we actually put down our into our sewer systems, that sometimes is what blocks it, and we saw some pretty spectacular pictures of that, so we all have a responsibility. And then finally, the other area is there's a finding around the governance structure, and what we said there is that the governance structure, which has the asset being owned by council, managed by Wellington Water, doesn't really work very well. In response again to the Residents' Coalition's comments, I think maybe they've missed that the government is intending some reforms, and they're intending some reforms fairly quickly, and those reforms are all about having multi-regional asset-owning entities which will be responsible for the governance and management and operation of the water system. Now, assuming that they drive that through, that is likely to happen within the next couple of years. So the implementation of water meters, which I think you can put a ring around in that model, is not necessarily going to be by council or Wellington Water, it will be by the successor organisation to that, but we need to start that work and continue to engage in the conversation with government. And the final point I wanted to make is, two final points I wanted to make, is that we're doing a great job, I think, in terms of resilience with new pipes and also the water reservoirs. I've mentioned Mayoral already, and we need to make sure that infrastructure investment is aligned to the growth needs of the city in terms of housing, etc. So look, I'm going to finish by again commending the Taskforce's work, thanking everybody who's been involved in it and commending it to Council for your adoption. Going to be seconded by Councillor Rush. Do you wish to speak?
I shall reserve.
Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Fitzsimons.
Well, thank you, Mayor Foster, and I do want to start as well with an acknowledgement of Councillor Condi and Mayor Foster and Councillor Rush for your work on this report. And I also particularly want to acknowledge one of the Taskforce members, Eugene Doyle, who's here today. He is a Owhiro Bay community champion and water activist, and on not one, not two, but 3 occasions, he's been part of exposing quite shocking inadequacies in public systems. The first one was a failure by Regional Public Health and Wellington Water to adequately signpost contaminated water at the Owhiro Bay stream. The second one was a failure of Remo and other agencies to have a wave warning system in place for Owhiro Bay, and now he's had an instrumental role in this report as well. And I'm particularly pleased that this report really pulls no punches. It genuinely is a warts and all approach, and it exposes a shocking historic underinvestment in water infrastructure, but I also think it exposes a failure of local government. The true level of underinvestment in the report is estimated to be up to $350 million, or a 250% increase needed. I really welcome that the report's honest about the causes, particularly around pressure to keep rates low, the failure of information flows and miscommunication. I'm not so sure about the prescription it contains in it around water meters. I do support the uptake of government reforms and the moves to look at asset transfers. But I'm not convinced that the report adequately addresses the fundamental failure of local government. Water meters feel to me like the classic dead cat on the table strategy, which, for those of you that don't know, is a strategy used by an Australian political consulting firm. And what it means is you put a dead cat on the table when you want someone to talk about something different to what you're actually talking about. It's to distract from the fundamental problems. And water meters feel a bit like that to me. I'm very sceptical about how the impact on poor people and renters will be managed. but I do accept that things need to change. I think the Mural Taskforce makes a very good case for amalgamation. There is just simply too much duplication across local government in our region, and I don't think there are enough water engineering specialists in New Zealand, let alone in Wellington. But I also think there's lessons for us as councillors and also for management. When the issues arose with water, I made some media comments, and on the back of that, I had 3 separate phone calls to my house from people who didn't want to say what their names were, but just said, you are onto something here, and then poured their heart out about the concerns they had about Wellington's water infrastructure. I don't think we're in a good position where people are anonymously calling city councillors to raise their concerns. There's something deeply wrong with the culture. And these were not kind of disgruntled whistleblowers. They were more professional, dedicated engineers who had for too long felt silenced by a culture which doesn't encourage dissent and debate. But really, we've got to think about why it came to that. And I just want to note that when Jill Day and I put the notice of motion asking for the inquiry into Wellington Water, we were pretty unpopular among some people. Some people said to us that there was a concern that we were undermining the relationship with Wellington Water, and a prevailing view that scrutiny was not a helpful thing, at least initially. But I'm really clear that good relationships involve robust and honest debate, and I think that's what the Mural Taskforce has given us. My biggest takeaway from this report is that our culture needs to change. As governors, we need to respectfully interrogate advice in a professional way. Sometimes there is real pressure on us to accept officers' advice and not to ask difficult questions, and this has to change. And if there's one thing that comes out of this task force that has implications for the other decisions we make around this table, I hope it will be that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Matthews, okay. Just don't see anybody else.
Kia ora koutou. I just want to speak very briefly to say and to reassure Wellingtonians that for everybody, I think not just around the ferry terminal, we don't just break out an agreement with Councillor Young, but that we're all in agreement that this is absolutely, a top priority, and that we can't, we cannot avoid the problems. I'd like to thank the task force for all their work, and I do want to speak again briefly to the issues around equity, particularly for renters. That if, depending on how, I think compared to Kapiti, we have a much higher proportion of renters, and we need to really think through these issues very seriously, especially in the light of a housing crisis, about how renters pay for water if they are, not responsible for fixing things. And, those are tricky issues we need to think our way through. And I guess I just also want to sort of outline my concerns that when there are so many big spending challenges ahead of us, about the wisdom of investing in meters rather than investing in pipes. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Matthews. Councillor Condi, then Councillor Day.
Thank you, Mayor Foster, and thank you for everybody. The reactions to the task force report have been really encouraging, and the amount of time that you've all clearly spent engaging with it have been really appreciated. I just want to acknowledge in terms of the 2 attachment that we have at the paper today, that the background document that was attached essentially goes through the terms of reference that we were given, because I really wanted to make sure that all of the terms of reference were adequately addressed so that councillors who had asked for those specific questions, they could see the answers. But actually, as we got into this as a task force, as often happens, you start digging into an issue and you find that things that you didn't realise were going to be important turn out to be important. And so as the task force started looking at writing their final report, we really wanted to move away from being constrained by those terms of reference while acknowledging that they were very important, to just tell the story as clearly as we could in the report. I think one of the things I'd really like to point out is the number of recommendations that are in the report that actually relate to the district plan coming up. So because we often focus on pipes, and there's certainly been lots of conversations about Wellington Water, and there are lots of recommendations about that, but there are actually a lot of recommendations in here that are about our district plan and what we can do as a council around land use and planning. And I think it's really important that we make sure that those get picked up as we move forward on our district plan review. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that the task force came to pretty much the same conclusions as the government reforms, completely separately from that process. So we'd pretty much already got to that place before the government reforms were announced. So I just want to acknowledge that this is really quite an endorsement of the direction of the government reforms. Obviously, there are specific issues that have to be worked out, but we landed in the same place separately from those conversations. I think, I absolutely acknowledge, Councillor Fitzsimons, that we are going to have to up our game in terms of how we engage with some of the really the advice that we get. And I think we've just been having conversations about asset management plans this week. And I think it's a reminder to all of us that our governance responsibilities around engaging in asset management planning, understanding our depreciation policies, all of those things are a really important part of our job, and we're going to have to make sure that we really raise our game on that for the long-term plan, because I think it's important that when we take a long-term plan out to our community that they can be confident that everything that needs to be in there is in there. Finally, I just want to talk briefly about water meters, and just acknowledging, Councillor Fitzsimons, your concern that water meters is a distraction. I think that Taskforce also were concerned that water meters would be a distraction, but not for the same reason, which is that water meters, we genuinely came to the view that given the challenges around leakage and water usage, that they are a really important tool that needs to be used. But we acknowledged that was going to be a really complex conversation for the community, and that would potentially take a lot of the oxygen. And that was a concern that we had, because we genuinely want to talk about the issues around the underinvestment, the governance challenges that have got us here in the first place. I think I want to acknowledge the equity issues that Councillor Matthews has raised, because that was again something that the Taskforce was very concerned about.
Sorry, I'll give you an extra minute.
Thank you. Something that Taskforce was very concerned about in all of our conversations, that while water meters do provide lots of benefits in terms of looking at leak detection and managing usage, which acknowledges the environmental and issues that we face, that there is an issue around charging and equity. And since we weren't actually designing a charging system, we didn't dig into those as much, but every person on the council unanimously was concerned about how we think about the impacts of low-income households, which was why we included the case study about how that was tackled in Kapiti Coast, to show how you can think about how you design those systems. But I do want to acknowledge that renters, the issues about how we charge renters and how we would, it's fine if you're a homeowner, it gets moved off of your rates bill and onto a different utility bill, that's fine. But as a renter, there are issues that we need to make sure that's worked through. And I think it's just another great reminder that not having renters in the room, sometimes I think that was, when you came to me straight away, I thought that's something that we should have included in the report, and it's definitely something we'll need to consider as we go forward.
Thank you. Councillor Day, and then I've got Councillor Day, Calvert, Foon and Paul. Councillor Rush, if you want to leap in at some stage, then you're welcome to do so as a seconder when you wish to do so, but just let me know. Councillor Pannett as well. Yep. Okay, right. Okay, Councillor Day.
Kia ora. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Councillor Fitzsimons for her leadership and her notice of motion, which was incredibly brave at the time, because obviously people don't necessarily want to have to face sometimes the challenges that are in front of us and to actually take that deep dive. But I'm appreciative of the work of the Mayor and Councillors Condi and Rush for their leadership, and to the task force. Many people have put their own time in for the benefit of our city and our environment, so thank you very much. I am going to add to the water meter conversation, so I'm very sceptical about residential water meters. Meters in themselves don't fix pipes, and at the moment that's our big problem, is pipes. Yes, we need to change behaviour of our residents with how much water is being used, but ultimately our immediate issue is fixing pipes, and the millions of dollars that would go into putting in meters could actually fix a lot of pipes, and I think that's really important we don't get distracted. It was good the other day being able to talk to some of the people on the task force and hear from experts on thinking about ways that we can change behaviour of water use through mechanisms other than just having a meter to tell you you're using too much. And I think there's a lot of social science that we can be looking at in educating people and trying to cut through the jargon, actually, because that's one of the things that I think communities switch off to. We need to make it real, and I think we've seen that happen in Ōwhiro Bay, with the community actually looking directly and experiencing the fallout of having a system that is failing. I just want to speak to the governance structure with regards to Te Mana o Te Wai and thinking about our opportunities of partnering with iwi in a much more genuine and partnership way. And we've seen that happen through the whaitua process where the co-governance and co-management of that has actually worked, and it's I think it's produced some really amazing results through the whaitua process, and I'm sure we could see that reflected better in the water space, three waters space. I think also interesting to note that we have an authority in Aotearoa who has used Section 33 to pass over some resource management acts responsibilities to actually my iwi, and it really is only a step. But it's interesting to see that councils are starting to look at the fact that actually mana whenua do have an important part to play and a lot of knowledge and experience and can be leading in that space. And I think there's a long way to go from monitoring to being able to be part of that decision making in a genuine way. I just want to acknowledge too, learning from Kapiti, their experience, that metering does help when you have options. So in Kapiti there's been a lot of growth and they've been able to build a lot of properties that actually have the grey water tanks as part of it. So talking to someone the other day that they actually have their grey water tank flushes toilets and goes through the washing machine. That makes it easier to cut down your water use, so it does make it more available and accessible to people.
Give you another minute.
Thank you. And I think last thing to say is just that we do have a fundamental problem, and I do agree about the District Plan, Councillor Condi, but a fundamental problem with the fact that we use drinking water to flush our toilet, wash ourselves and clean our clothes. It is just ridiculous, and I think we fundamentally need to be looking at that, particularly with our new builds, that we should be being smarter about that and actually looking at ways. There's so much amazing science around the world and what we could do to change the processes in existing dwellings as well. So I think it's important that we are using every possible scientific piece of information and research to do the best we can. But yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. So I've got Councillor Calvert, Foon, Paul and Bennett. Bennett.
Thank you.
Bennett, sorry. It's been a long year.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons. I hadn't heard about the dead cat on the table, but it's actually, I think this, you could say our water infrastructure is the dead cat. But we need to fix it, and I think this report is the basis for that. And I thank Councillors Condi, Rush and the Mayor for doing the hard yards on this, and also for the community and officer representatives. And I don't believe, knowing a number of those individuals on that task force, that there wouldn't have been any difficult conversations withheld. So I'm feeling very comfortable that it would have been a very robust process, and as much as you have difficult conversations, is you actually have to find a constructive way forward. And I think this is what this task force does. It provides some clear recommendations for us to take forward and to consider. And as part of that is actually sequencing how those things will be done. So it's not about a total focus on water meters. That's one element, but it is a system approach. So at what point they're considered, it's still to be determined. And so, and acknowledging that government reforms are coming in, so who knows what will happen in 2 or 3 years' time. But I do thank for the constructive way forward. And I would also like to acknowledge, because I remember at the time that the notice of motion came to set up the task force, that's what the Mayor was actually working on, because I had conversations with him, because we'd all faced the issues, and especially after the pipe burst in Mount Albert, and all the issues there, and also on Willa Street. And I have to say, I haven't had anybody anonymously contact me about water issues, but I've had a lot of people contact me with their names, and even so much as knocking on my door at 7:15 on a Saturday morning telling me that there was a massive water leak in my street because a councillor lived there. So look, I think we are hearing from our community. They will be really pleased to see this report, that it's done in a constructive way, and they will be looking forward to what we include in our long-term plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Calvert. Councillor Foon.
Kia ora tātou, can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. Ngā mihi nui to all who were the collective intelligence that have put this report together. Thank you to our councillor colleagues, officers, mana whenua who were contributing at a time that wasn't convenient for them particularly, and to members of the community, and particularly Eugene Doyle for your leadership here. The document is very good, and key points of this need to be understood by every Wellingtonian. We don't understand and care for the water that we receive, this precious resource, enough. So yes, the recommendations are good and clear, and I will be supporting the ask of us today. Reading the report, however, did make me very sad, just that from a mana whenua perspective and experience of the governance of a precious taonga, but also that we didn't take practical steps to really better the situation along the way. However, it's really good to have a real understanding of where we're at today. And reflecting that this has been the year of the pipes, Mayor, you said that very well. There were sobering observations of the Awhero catchment by Eugene, and my own worst nightmare of the poo trucks being trucked around the south coast over lockdown. And while that was managed very well, it does leave me using that term again, slightly bitter and twisted, that we'll now have to be paying for that and not other things that we could be using that money for in the long-term plan. So one of the main observations of the Regional Climate Change Reference Group that Councillor Paul is leading on behalf of Wellington City Council is that the east of our region will get drier and the west will get wetter. And after the Hawke's Bay floods, the stormwater recommendations have really stood out to me, and that we need to pull all the levers, and as you said, Councillor Condi, on the district plan, to water-sensitive urban design, rainwater and stormwater harvesting, rain gardens, constructed wetlands, green roofs, the list goes on. We need to work with the environment resource that we have. And while our constituents are pleading with us to make our water pipe sexy, I urge us, for the sake of further costs and pressure on our existing infrastructure, that we need to make grey water sexy too. Thank you for the work, everybody. Kia ora.
You leave some big challenges with us, Councillor Foon. Councillor Pannett. Oh, sorry, Councillor Paul, sorry. Then Councillor Pannett.
Oh, long year. Kia ora tātou. I just really wanted to thank all of the members of the task force, the Mayor, Councillor Condi, Councillor Rush, for all of your mahi, and I was just really impressed by the calibre of expertise on that task force, particularly Stu Farron, Karapuki Tapu, Hikitia, Ropata, Eugene, all of your mahi, and I thought it was quite interesting that Councillor Condi mentioned that there weren't renters on that task force, because I also found it really interesting that there were only 2 women on that task force. So I think in future we need to think about, is this task force representative of our community? I do want to just quickly acknowledge some of the comments made by the Residents Coalition that came in this morning, particularly the one around that water should remain being free. And I think that really did highlight to me that kind of fundamental issue with our mindset towards water, because it's not free, and our water sources are continuing to be depleted, and those storm and wastewater leaks into those waterways are a threat to biodiversity. Thinking about those precious tuna out at Awhero Stream and all of the biodiversity and our moana, so there are significant costs to the environment that can't be quantified, and I think that's something we have to keep front of mind in this conversation, because that's something that we can't get back once it's gone. So I just really wanted to acknowledge that yes, water is precious and finite, and we do need to look at every measure that we have at our disposal, and I do think I am really confident in the skills that were around that task force, and I think if you felt that this was worth investigating and that it was one of the most reliable ways that we can address this problem, then I trust you that is something that we need to look into and talk to our community about. And I feel reassured that from that briefing that the people on the task force are committed to equity and ensuring that our most vulnerable communities are not further disadvantaged by any of these measures. So just want to thank you all for your work and really impressed, so kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Pannett.
Kia ora koutou, and I'd also like to add my thanks to the task force and those who have challenged us about our performance, because it's always good to be challenged, and to recognise, of course, the pain of mana whenua, although we did try to actually rectify that last training. I'll talk about that in a minute. So look, we're not the only one having problems with water. We know that TAs around the country are struggling, and so it is right that there is change. I think some of the recommendations are excellent. I love the fact of talking around ecological restoration and community involvement, and just to reassure you that some of the work has already been started, particularly in the climate change space. I will just endorse the comments of my colleagues who have raised concerns around water meters. I do not support them, and also this basic move to potential privatisation of water assets. I'll just remind you that both parties in our parliament have sold assets, and so when people say that they will not be sold, I am not entirely convinced. I think the other thing too is that we just need to remember that rates are good. We have had now many years of saying we've got to keep the rates down. Actually, rates are what pay for things, and they are good things, and we should celebrate that. I guess I will just highlight too, just in terms of the privatisation, you'll see in the last 6 days that it's the first time that water has been traded on the NASDAQ. That is a worry. Might have some positive benefits, but it is a worry. Who controls water? Controls the history of our and future of our planet. Look, I think there's been some governance failures well recognised, and that's helpful. We kept the rates low. We didn't spend what we needed to. I should have fought harder for more money. Like, you know, I come cap in hand every year begging for $100,000. I should have said, stuff that. I want multi-millions of dollars. And, you know, everyone has supported that. We also put in place a funding envelope, which we shouldn't have done. So it's, I think that's really good to have had that challenge to say, look, you need to say what you need and then go. I just want to respond to the point that we didn't spend our depreciation money on renewals, because it's actually a bit more complex than that. Yes, we got the money for depreciation, but then we had to make a whole lot of calls about where we put money, and sometimes it was into other areas of water, which absolutely had to be done. We have, and I'm proud of this, have put a lot of money into earthquake resilience over the last decade, and also we have tried to improve aspects of our environmental performance, which is fantastic. We didn't ask Wellington Water enough questions about what their actual costs were, and hopefully that will be fixed. I would just like to say that I think the report would have benefited from emphasising some of the wins. So the first one I want to start off with is that this body is the first one to give some kind of equal partnership to mana whenua, better than this council has done. I tried to get more power but wasn't successful, but I'm sure that can be picked up again. We've put a large amount of money into...
I'll give you another minute.
Thank you, nearly finished. Wastewater, stormwater, you know, we could put more, but we have put that money in the community. That was what they were tolerant of. It was Mr Crampton who basically broke the deadlock on Omaroro, and so that is a very, very significant project. We've got making progress on the sludge issue, which is absolutely critical. We have the highest quality drinking water in the country, along with Auckland, something to celebrate. We mustn't be casual about that, but we do have good quality water drinking quality, which we must have. We sowed the seeds for water-sensitive urban design. We've taken action on climate change. Nothing had been done, and we have done that, and that is fantastic. So, look, love the challenge, love the questions, we'll do better, but I think before we say it's a complete disaster, there have been some successes, and I'm sure there will be more.
Thanks, Councillor Pannett. Councillor O'Neill, and then Deputy Mayor Ferry.
Kia ora, councillors. I just very briefly wanted to talk to the Task Force report, and firstly to just start by congratulating the councillors and members of the group that have been working incredibly hard. Eugene, to Councillor Condi, Councillor Rush and Mayor Foster, as well as I know that this has been top of mind and top of thinking for a lot of meetings over the past year. One thing that's incredibly clear in the book is that it's not written like many other reports that I've read on a state of something, but it seems to be incredibly frank and using some really good language to help. Pretty much anyone can pick up this book and kind of understand where we've gone wrong and what we need to do next. And I'd like to congratulate you for the kind of language that you've used in making this making understanding three waters for Wellington pretty accessible. A pretty clear recommendation that is coming out from this book, which is an assumption that I've held, but now I'm really happy to have on the table, is that water is not finite, and we can't take it for granted, and that there is water is not free, water is included in the rates bill, and that there is a pretty significant large cost to the degradation of our natural environment. There's a significant cost being taken out on many of the aquifers that we have around our city, including the Hutt River. We cannot continue in a sustainable way, in our own way, with water management, and that we do need to look into different measures in that regard. Having said that, on the water metering issues, I've just briefly skimmed a few papers, and I know in the past that there's been quite a lot of extensive research into the inequity challenges for water metering, and so take this time to pause to consider some of the other things that we will need to be looking at before we make a sweeping recommendation. That's why I'm also happy today in this paper that this is a recommendation to accept this report and look at it at the table, but it is not a recommendation to make a decision on water metering. We know through different studies that a one-size-fits-all approach is not successful and has not been successful in terms of water metering, and that there is a pretty large discourse around who vulnerable people are, and of course almost half of the people that fill Wellington's population are renters. There is another dichotomy there, which is that vulnerable households are much more likely to suffer from medical conditions which require substantial increases in water uses, and that's another thing that we need to consider as well. So, going forward, as a part of this report, and as a part of just a few things that I've read about what other local authorities have done, I look forward to an extensive analysis relating on to our options going forward, and that's where I believe the appropriate debate for water metering should be held as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Neill. Deputy Mayor Ferry.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I don't need to add too much more because, of course, I had a wee bit of a say with the annual report. But one of the things I'd really like to congratulate the people who worked together on this is that you managed to get to a unanimous decision. I think that is incredibly powerful. And I know that doesn't come easily. It often takes a lot of hard work and really listening to each other to work out where the consensus actually lies. But I think because you reached consensus, that this report has a lot more value than it would have had otherwise. I actually feel that this is one of the standout achievements collectively of our council in this first year. It is a really significant piece of work, and I would be very surprised if other councils and even the government were not really interested in this report. It is clear really that there are a lot of things that need to be fixed. I agree with Councillor Pannett that it's not all broken. You know, we do have really good drinking water on the whole. Our sewerage does function and we don't have too many dramas. And, you know, the stormwater, we've worked hard on that in the last few years. Actually, that's probably the problem that up until now was the most evident, was that we were getting flooding in some of our streets and, you know, some of our low-lying areas, the drainage actually wasn't that great. And so there's been a big focus on that and providing new reservoirs and things. But it's become really clear that in the course of addressing those things, other things have been overlooked and now need lots of attention. The water metering thing I think is really interesting. The recommendation basically says, in my view, that we need to have we need to consider it. We need to work out not how to consider it. There's the devil's in the detail, and there's obviously a lot more work to be done. But I think there is a very big issue in that it's a bit like insulating a house. The landlord has to provide, with renters, the landlord has to actually pay for the insulation, which costs them. They don't benefit necessarily from the lower power bills. So you need to have some way, and the way to get around that is to make things necessary. So we have the rental warranted fitnesses and things like that. We probably need central government to step in and actually require landlords to fix leaks. So that if we have water metering, then the things actually work in the way that they're meant to. But as I say, these are all details. I think what's required at the moment is to have an open mind about water metering. I think we do need something. Don't know what else I can say really. I think just again to reiterate, this is I think a very important and significant report, and I really thank Councillor Fitzsimons and Councillor Day for actually bringing this to the table. I thank the Mayor for his leadership, and thank Councillor Condi and Councillor Rush. But you know, just the work that's gone into this, it has been almost a whole year of solid work, but the results are really, really good. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Rush, yes.
Thanks. I really appreciate all your comments. I'm just going to start by saying that what very early became apparent to me was different groups that were talking to the Mural Taskforce were saying the same things. And that, for me, became a refreshing way to start documenting where we would go forward. And it really came from, basically, we've come from a little country, a little town, and we've grown and we've got bigger and we've got massive supply, and we've never had to worry about that supply. We do now. So when I used to work in the gas industry, we had a major burst in the Mayoral pipeline. We knew exactly where it was. We shut down the pipeline for 3 or 4 days. It cost billions of dollars to do so, fixed it and got it up and running again. The way it works with water is that you just simply put more water in. You get these breaks and you put more water in, keep the pressure up. So we do need to do something about that. But certainly, again, in the private sector, if you had an asset that you were sweating and you had put money aside to knowing that you would have to replace it one day, that would show up on your books. And it didn't seem to me that that was happening here with the water system. So we had an undue confidence that we had a lot of debt that we could call on, and yet we did have these liabilities that were hidden away. Nevertheless, we know about that now, and we'll go forward. Just talking through some of the comments made from Fleur, I think we all need to be water activists. The changing culture needs to move. And I don't think it's a big move at all to be proud of water, to be proud of the streams and our rohi, to be proud of our oceans and where we swim. And also, yes, to get kura and tuna. Tuna is actually eel, right? Not tuna, yeah. Yeah. So, and we need to take responsibility, each and every one of us. And yes, the water sensitive urban design sort of stuff is well advanced. We've been working on that with the team here to put in place in the district plan. So look to see those coming towards us. Equity. You're right about the dead cat, Councillor Fitzsimons. I mean, in reality, this is about understanding our network, managing it, replacing things before they break, and making sure that everyone's got water. Water meters are simply a tool, and yes, as Councillor Condi mentioned, we actually did wonder whether it would be a distraction. It's a conversation for another day. It's out there. I just want you to know, though, that part of my postgrad courses that I did last year was a natural resource economics course, which dealt with allocation of water. So I understand there are a number of different tools, and also know some people might be able to help us. Councillor Day.
I'll give you an extra minute.
Thank you. I better hurry up then. Councillor Day, I am, I believe, the only person in the Whai Tour who has actually proposed that we have a discussion whereby mana whenua would take over responsibility. I have proposed that, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I'm going to wind up. My good friend Iona Panet talks about rates. People will pay rates if they're getting value for money. Simple as that. People will pay their rates if they're getting value for money. So I'm just going to finally say some thanks. And yes, it was warts and all. I demanded that, and everyone else did as well. I want to particularly pay thanks to my friend, Councillor Condi, who actually held the pen for the last 2 or 3 drafts and worked incredibly hard over weekends to get this out. So a big thanks to Jenny. I knew that when she was put on the task force that we were going to get good value for our money. I'd also like to, though, thank the folks at Wellington Water, particularly David Wright, who's now the former chair of the board, David Bassett, who's the chair, and good old Colin. You know, in those dim, dark days of lockdown, and we're praising our essential workers, I was so proud to be the portfolio lead for water, because those folks at Wellington Water were just incredible. So internally, Mike, see you there, Bax, who's not here, and Zach, thanks to them as well. And lastly, to Eugene, of course. So cheers.
Thanks, Councillor Rush. I think that's us, right? No, I do need to reply to a few things here. Look, there are quite a few things. So, councillors, thank you for a very positive debate, and particularly for the acknowledgements of the hard work that has gone in there. Just responding to a few things, Councillor Fitzsimons, the shocking historic underinvestment. Actually, it wasn't as evident as you might think it was, and I guess you can actually look around the back of. Now, I'm going to ask every one of you. Yeah, they might look at that there because we've highlighted it, but if you actually look through the annual report, you go and tell me if you can find the numbers. Now, they're in there, but they're not highlighted. And this was something that was made quite clear to me. I had that conversation with Jeff Dangerfield, and he said, actually, you wouldn't find them unless you were really looking for them. And the other thing is to say that we had, you know, I look back over when this started, I look back over the last 9 years. Do you know how many papers we had on the state of our pipes? None. Not one. Not one. And did it come up as a major issue in election debates? Nope. Nope. No. Year after year after year. No, it didn't. Look, it might have done to a few people, but I wasn't hearing that a lot. So, but on the flip side of that, of course, is that people were not paying for it. So it's not like we had taken money from people and not given them something. What we tended to do is give them something else, though. We invested in other things, you know, whether it's sport and recreation facilities or, you know, town halls or whatever. That's what tended to happen because it was basically giving us headroom in the debt space. You also asked, was metering a dead cat as a distraction? No. Metering quite clearly, and it was one that it was probably the area that we spent the most time on, and we wanted to make sure that we were actually saying that it's really, really important that we actually make sure that whatever scheme is set up is done, you know, in a way which is sensitive to affordability and people having adequate, good quality, affordable water supply. But no, it wasn't a distraction. It was something which is regarded as an essential tool. And, you know, sometimes you think we were the first city in the world that's done this. We're not. We're not. In fact, you know, just talking to some, you know, this was a topic I've had with some of our European friends in particular. They said, you're not water metered already? Remarkable. Remarkable. So, no, but basically it didn't make sense 10 years ago. But it does now. And the reason it does now, having that conversation at very least, is because we're getting, with population growth, we're getting closer and closer and closer to the limits of our water supply. But we do have to be very, very careful about how we do that. And look, we won't be the first ones to invent this. You know, we can look at lots of other councils up and down this country and overseas about how they've dealt with it and make sure that we do that in a way which works for our whole community. Councillor Condi, the point you made about asset management planning, I guess I would say that is the bedrock of our LTP. And that's the bit we need to make sure we get our heads around. The last LTP we did 3 years ago, the asset management plan, the 30-year infrastructure plan looked like that. And that was one, for the first time ever, I voted against, because I thought that is just not adequate. Years gone by, we used to have asset management plans, there was a stack of papers like this, but actually we've gone backwards. And so we need to go forwards in that space. Councillor Day, water meters don't fix pipes. Yes, that's absolutely correct. However, they do help identify where the pipes are broken. And the problem is at the moment, quite often we actually don't know. And they also help identify waste. I mean, we had the example of a single property in Marlborough given to us where they were using 70,000 litres of water a day for one residential property because of the breaks in that property. That's the kind of thing you fix. Kapiti gives you the example of 25% water reduction. Auckland, they use basically a third less water than we do. It's not an accident that's the case. So it is a very important tool that we can use. You also mentioned grey water tanks. That's a district plan issue, as Councillor Condi raised, and the use of grey water. Well, at the moment, the issue with grey water is it's actually the cost is not the water itself. It's the infrastructure to get the water here. And it actually at the moment makes sense that we have one set of pipes rather than two sets of pipes. However, as we get closer and closer to that time when actually we are running out of supply capacity, then you start thinking about what is the infrastructure that you need to invest in. That's when it becomes important. Just quickly moving on. Councillor Paul, thank you for your comments about threats to biodiversity. I completely agree with that, and we do. So often the environment bears the cost for what we do, and often those things are not factored in. Those externalities are not factored into what we do, and we know now that we're putting just too much pressure on the planet and on the other inhabitants of the planet. Councillor Pannett. Rates are good, yes, but of course we've also got to bear in mind the affordability, and we do hear from people, particularly those on fixed incomes, who are saying we're struggling. So we need to make sure, and Councillor Rush said this, that we are delivering value for money. Thank you, though, for highlighting, and we probably didn't highlight enough that we have. It's not as though we've done nothing over the years. That was probably one of the debate spaces we did have, because I said, actually, we're not completely terrible. We've done some good things. And if I do pick those up, one is we made a massive investment, of course, in in my time, in our wastewater treatment plants, because you go back to the 1980s and the sewage was literally on the beach. So we invested a huge amount of money in treatment plants. We also invested a lot of money in improving the pipes so that the pipes themselves didn't generally, I can remember it was $70 million in the 1990s in those days, so it's probably triple that now, in stopping wastewater getting into the harbour. And you also highlighted the investment which we made. Most of our water supply now is in resilient reservoirs. It's stored in resilient reservoirs, so we have invested there. I think you also highlighted the NASDAQ, and it was interesting. I just had a quick flick through there. It's particularly in places where this whole issue of tradable water rights, particularly in agriculture, is one that New Zealand is facing. And of course, we had the LAWA report, which said exactly those kind of things, that water is not necessarily used by the highest and best use. It's often used by the first come, first served, and that's not something that rather than necessarily the metropolitan area, but it also has an issue for metropolitans. Councillor O'Neill, you're quite correct. This is not making a recommendation about water metering, but is making a recommendation that we need to consult our community about water metering. And that is about all that I needed to cover. Yep, I think that's all I needed to cover. Thank you, councillors, for a very positive debate. And again, thank you to everybody who's been involved in getting this report to this point, and I'm very proud to introduce it. Councillors, let's vote. Right, that takes Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora koutou. I'll speak very briefly to this. To move the paper for our advisory group's review, thank officers for their work. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our advisory group members with their range of views and perspectives for all the work they do to help us make a better city. And I was really pleased to see very good broad support from those groups for the recommendations of the review. And it's basically just simple changes to make these groups even more effective and support them more to be consistent over time, and to make sure that their input is at that strategic level. 2021 will be an exciting year with the establishment of the Rainbow Advisory Group, and also doing work with our multicultural and migrant communities on what is the best model for them to have more formal and regular engagement with the council. And there is definitely a commitment, I think, around this table to a more formal and regular engagement with those communities. So yes, I just we had a very full discussion and lots of community input last week, so hopefully we might not today.
We hope so. Councillor O'Neill, do you want a second? Okay, do you wish to speak? Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Calvert, Councillor Rush.
Okay. Look, I just want to also shout out to those community representatives from our various ethnic communities that have shared their views about a more structured engagement approach with council. I thank them because I think we heard from people that we don't normally hear from either. So again, just showing us more of that diversity that makes up our city. I'm tabling a number of those presentations and submissions and emails that I've received as part of this. Now, one of the common themes coming through from from our ethnic communities is that they do want an opportunity to develop a more structured engagement approach with us and around the services that we provide. The current way that we are doing that is in need of an overhaul. And this is not just about cultural activities, but it's also for social and economic well-being. And we heard from Jess Wong before, who also belongs to the Future Dragons, which I'd never heard of before, but thinking it's a group of young professionals and what they're doing for our city. So, and I think we've got to remember that our council provides many services, so not just in the arts and cultural space, we also provide our libraries and community facilities, we also provide our social housing, and also from an economic development perspective, when we talk about our ethnic communities, the diversity that they bring, but the talent that they bring to our city, and also the international relations that they bring to our city. We know we've got the diplomatic corps here, and they're often in contact with their communities and hearing from them about what they want. Look, I appreciate that the committee last week made a decision not to proceed with an advisory group because they wanted to see more engagement with those ethnic communities. And whilst acknowledging that, I think that there is a more cohesive way forward involving both our officers in terms of what they're going to do, but also from a governance perspective. And so I did have discussed this with the mayor, and I know he's also working with the rainbow community to develop an agreed action plan, which also includes the establishment of an advisory group. And so when talking to the mayor, he also appreciates the significance of our ethnic communities. And we've heard that they make up over 20% of our population here in Wellington, and acknowledges that the council does need to do more so that we can hear directly from them. So the mayor has agreed, and I'm sure he'll confirm that in terms of his own individual
Councillor,
meetings.
can I get you to wind up, please?
Okay.
'Cause this time I'm not going to extend the times unless you desperately need to.
I'm definitely winding up.
Yeah.
That we will have with the individual meetings with the various ethnic groups, that we will widen that to establish a group that we can work with and work with officers to start hearing from them and develop up solutions and ensure that any funding requirement can be considered within the current LTP process.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very quickly, so I generally think that representation should be rooted through being elected. However, in regards to the Rainbow Advisory Group, although I have got links into the gay community, I think the challenges being faced are so removed from my experience and people I know that I just really think that group will be really helpful to help me out. So I'm very supportive of that.
Thanks, Councillor Rush. Councillor Sparrow, and then Councillor Young, Councillor Day.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have previously suggested that we should be looking at the overall picture in terms of further advisory groups rather than proceeding on an ad hoc or piecemeal basis, which is what we seem to be doing. And there may well be merit in certain further advisory groups, but in my opinion, I still think we should be asking officers to examine the current mix to determine what further groups might be established as advisory groups and the reasons why, and whether there is a better mechanism for the voice of some groups to be heard. Next in the lineup, we may well have a request for a seniors advisory group, SAG, or perhaps a dog reference advisory group, DRAG, or has been suggested to me, facetiously I suspect, a NIMBYs advisory group, NAG. So there are endless possibilities. To deal with those in front of us right now and those yet to come, best practice would see us coming up with a plan, a process from the outset. And without that, I believe we're getting ahead of ourselves with the addition of further advisory groups. Therefore, I'm not comfortable supporting recommendation 2, and I'm not sure about recommendation 3. I'm not sure that it goes far enough, which is what my concerns are all about.
Thanks, Councillor Sparrow. Councillor Young.
I think it's pretty well known. I don't like any advisory groups. I don't like community boards. I think they're an anachronism because we now have pretty good communications. And I'm also opposed to ad hoc decisions about various groups. However, Councillor Matthews, I've gone through these things and I thought, actually, I don't have a problem with this because, one, they're going to use the existing criteria. I'm not going to read all the points out, but I think these measures, to a certain extent, address my concerns, even though fundamentally I don't like the thing, but if we're going to have them. So I will support this, even though I said I wouldn't be. So there you go.
Councillor Day.
Harmony reigns. I'd just like to start by acknowledging Councillor Matthews' leadership in the advisory group review. Since she was elected, she keeps messaging me asking when it's going to come back to SPC. We got there, and it's been a good process, and I want to acknowledge Carolyn for the work that she has done, working closely with the groups and making sure that they are very much part of the process. And then also want to acknowledge Democracy Services for their amazing support that they've been providing for our existing advisory groups. I'm really pleased to see the number 2 and 3 recommendations. I think it's important that we do have representation from communities who do struggle to have a voice and be heard at council, and that we can always improve the way that we operate in the city. And we did hear last week from some of the submitters about the challenges of working with council, and that particularly was represented from some of the ethnic communities, that it's at the moment it's down to lobbying the councillors that they know, and that's not really a great process. We need them to have access and working with our staff. So I appreciate them coming and sharing that with us. And I want to acknowledge Councillor Calvert for her leadership with the multicultural community. I know you've worked hard over 4 years to try and bring communities closer, and I appreciate that that this is only just a step towards that, but it's important that we do that. I believe it must be done with communities, and I know that the Rainbow community has been working closely with council for years, and actually that there have been ethnic groups that have also been working with council for years, but with the multicultural number 3 recommendation, we just do need to work with the communities together and make sure that we've come out with something that works, because there are some challenges. There are a huge number of ethnicities and faiths in this city, and we need to make sure that we have some sort of fair representation. Having 10 to 12 people on a group, we'll still have groups coming and telling us that they aren't participating and they're not part of it. So I think maybe we need a forum or something where we can interact with all groups. Also, talking about the election idea, which came up last week, what we did find through the advisory group review was that the election process, particularly because PAG was our only group that had it, was that it added another level of burden on that group of people, feeling that they had a big responsibility to the people that elected them, when actually they're really just here to advise council. They're not able to really have a huge, they can't come and vote around the table. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. And I just want to confirm, Councillor Calvert, that the amendment that we did last week that has become the recommendation number 3 wasn't agreeing to not proceed. It was exactly the opposite. It was agreeing to proceed, but to do it with the community and make sure that we come out with something which people feel comfortable with interacting with. So I feel very confident and comfortable that we've got a way forward. Thank you, Mayor Foster, for your leadership and for helping us do that. Really appreciate it.
Right of reply. Oh, Councillor O'Neill, just in time.
Thank you. Just really briefly wanted to talk to this paper and to reiterate some of the some of the thanks that a lot of our own advisory group members have passed on as a part of this review, and to thank particularly Councillor Matthews for her diligence in this, and Councillor Calvert as well for holding the previous portfolio for engagement. I believe you would have been around through the first part of the review as well. Oh, nope, sorry, my apologies. The review first started probably just almost about 2 years ago, and recognised that members of the advisory groups were probably not feeling that their own mana or their own communities were being as valued and their own expertise as valued within the council building as possible. And throughout the report there are a range of recommendations that make better strides to communicating and working with members of those groups. Across our advisory panels we've had an incredibly fluid and high turnover of members of the groups, and just to thank people in particular for their patience of the review. I wanted to briefly touch on the Pacifica Advisory Group, which I've had the privilege to sit on this year, and to acknowledge that we are much richer for the people and their input into council. Pacifica Advisory Group have been responsible for a range of amazing pieces of work before my time, including the Pacifica Festival. They have had the Kapasa report implemented at council, and this year we've seen the direct communication between the Pacifica Advisory Group and our own policy teams being put into play, and really seeing the work of many of our representatives on that group reflected in policy as well. Lastly, and that to carry on the thanks, we had our last Pacifica Advisory Group meeting earlier. I can't remember, no, it would have been last week, and they passed on their thanks to, in particular, to Jennifer and Sean, and I know that Heidi's done a really good job looking after the other groups. Jocelyn took a moment to pause, and this is probably going to embarrass Sean, but Jocelyn took a moment to pause to thank Jennifer and talked a bit about the importance of the relationship of a democracy advisor, and she put her hands on Sean's shoulders and said, "Thank you, because you've given us a son. You've given us somebody who has genuinely put in the work to understand the people on this committee and understand the needs and wants." And just that was a moment to be about how invaluable institutions like these, who may not feel like the friendliest of walls at the same time, can be improved with relationships. And lastly, just to briefly talk about the creation of a Rainbow Advisory Group and recognising that...
Sorry, can I get you to wind up?
Sure. And recognising that there's a lot more work to be done, broader than an advisory group. We need to make our city safer as well, and to continue respecting the relationships with many different groups around the area as well. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Councillor Matthews, right to reply.
Very briefly, because I don't want anybody to get hangry, that I really do reject the idea that this has been ad hoc. But if it is ad hoc, it has been the longest, most drawn-out ad hoc thing ever. And I also just want to say that the last thing I would want to do, even though I'm now kind of getting into council bureaucrat land, is to follow a review with an immediate another review. And I just would note quickly that we do have criteria for new groups, and to advise Councillor Sparrow that one of them is that it's groups we don't normally hear from. So I think that would mean that your seniors group and your NIMBY group are definitely not eligible to have an advisory group. Have heard it from a few NIMBYs this year. Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Councillor. Now, does anybody want to take any recommendations separately? Which? 2 and 3. So we'll vote on 1, and then we'll vote on 2 and 3. Okay? Yep. Okay, so let's vote on 1. Done. That's unanimous. Okay, let's vote on 2 and 3. Well, no, that one's not just receiving information. No, it's actually substantive. That was the guts of the work. Yeah. Terry. Right. Okay. No, I'm doing it anyway. Yeah, okay, right, okay. Right, councillors, I'm going to move that we move into excluded. The reasons are, sorry? Yes, we have.
Yeah, we did that first.
We did that first. Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're going to move into public excluded. The reasons are set out there. Commercial transaction, section 72B(1). The grounds are sections 48(1)A. And then the appointments to council-controlled organisations 72A and section 48(1)A. So I'm going to move that, seconded by, thanks, Councillor Condi. Any debate? I'll put that.
Can I just ask when this information will be made public? It's a matter of public interest.
Yeah. The commercial transaction may take a while. It will be depending on when the deal is done, and the appointment to council-controlled organisations is usually within a day or so.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that was the
sorry.
first one I'm more interested in.
Sorry, for the first one, Councillor Pennant, there may be negotiations around plant with other supplier members, so it might not be.
Oh, good on you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, so it might be.
Okay.
Might be longer
than
than execution.
Okay, I just want it to be public eventually. What's that? Yeah. Decisions.
Councillor Foon? Oh, that was a yes. Right, okay, cool. Thank you. Done. That's good. Right, we're in public excluded, so we'll turn the cameras off. We've still got Councillor Foon.